Welcome, traveler of the quiet hours, to the sleepy scholar. Somewhere beneath your feet, right now, in a hillside in Turkey, or a bog in Denmark, or a courtyard in Peru, there is a stone that someone touched with intention thousands of years ago, and left behind a question that no living person has ever been able to answer. Tonight we are going to go looking for those questions, not to solve them, just to sit with them, gently, the way you might sit with an old photograph of someone whose name you never learned. Over the next couple of hours, we are going to walk through 100 true mysteries from the world of archaeology. Real digs, real objects, real bones, real cities, real handwriting from people who have been gone so long that even their language has vanished with them. We will hold a 12-sided bronze object that more than 100 Roman workshops made, and that not one Roman writer ever bothered to explain. We will stand at the edge of a stone platform in Lebanon, so heavy that modern engineers still argue about how it was ever lifted. We will drift down, slowly, through the silt of a sunken Egyptian harbor, and up into the dry wind above a Peruvian desert, where a hummingbird has been waiting patiently for 2,000 years to be understood. You do not need to remember any of it. You do not need to stay awake for any of it. That is rather the point. Let your eyes close whenever they want to. Let your shoulders drop. If your mind drifts off in the middle of a sentence, that is not losing the story. That is simply where your story ends for tonight, and the mystery will still be here, patient as stone, whenever you come back to it. If you enjoy resting here among old questions, consider subscribing to The Sleepy Scholar, so the next quiet mystery finds its way to you without any effort on your part. For now, there is nothing to solve and nowhere to be. Just the sound of a voice and the slow, dim outline of the past, waiting to be wondered about instead of known. Let's begin gently, close to home, with the object small enough to fit inside a human hand. Fact 1. In the year 1739, in the English Midlands, a farmer's hand closed around a small bronze shape that did not look like anything he had ever pulled from a field before. It had 12 flat faces, each one a pentagon, and at the center of every face sat a round, open hole, a different size on every side, ringed by a small knob at each of its 20 corners. It was heavy for its size, cool, deliberately made, the work of a skilled Roman hand. Since that first discovery, more than 130 of these small bronze puzzles have surfaced across the old Roman provinces of northern Europe, always in the north, curiously, never once in Italy itself, as though the idea belonged to the edges of the empire rather than to Rome. Think of it like finding a chess piece with no board, in a house with no other furniture. The Romans wrote constantly. They left us letters about shopping lists, love affairs, army pay disputes, and yet not a single surviving Roman text, not one wall painting, not one mosaic, ever mentions this object or shows a person holding one. Scholars have guessed at candlesticks, knitting tools, army rangefinders, dice for a forgotten game. None of the guesses quite fit the wear marks, or the lack of them. Some of these dodecahedra show almost no signs of use at all, as if they were made not to be handled, but simply to exist, quietly, in the dark. And somewhere between a Roman workshop and tonight, The reason why has slipped entirely out of reach, but that was only the first small shape to keep its secret. Across the same rolling hills of Britain, something older still was waiting in the ground. Fact 2. Long before Rome ever set foot on British soil, in the late Stone Age, someone was carving stone into perfect, deliberate spheres. Over 400 of these carved stone balls have been found, mostly in Scotland, dating back as far as 5,000 years. Each is roughly the size of a cricket ball, and each one is different, no two alike. Some smooth with raised discs, others cut deep into knobs and spirals that echo the swirling patterns found on pottery and standing stones of the same era. Picture holding a stone in your palm that took someone many patient hours to carve, using nothing but harder stone and time. That is craftsmanship spent on an object with no obvious function, the way we might spend an evening on a puzzle simply because our hands want something to do. They have been found in graves, in settlements, always alone, never in matching sets. Were they weapons thrown at pests in the fields? Weights for a trade we no longer remember? Toys passed from a parent to a child? Tools for measuring the movement of the moon? Every theory has fit some of the balls and failed the rest, because whoever carved that very first shape did not leave behind an instruction manual, only the object itself, still cool and heavy and unreadable in a museum drawer tonight. And it turns out these were not the only stone shapes carrying an unspoken message. Fact 3. In a child's grave in Yorkshire, in 1889, 3 chalk cylinders were lifted gently from the soil, each one carved with eyes, eyebrows, a small nose, patterns like a face only half remembered. They came to be called the Folkestone drums, and for over a century they sat quietly in a museum, presumed to be exactly what their shape suggested: ceremonial drums for a Stone Age funeral. Then, in 2015, a 4th drum was found nearby, more elaborate than the rest, and researchers began to look closer at the details they had overlooked. The drums show no wear from being struck. Their circumference lines up, almost too precisely, with a unit of measurement some researchers call the long foot, the same measurement some believe was used to lay out ancient monuments. Others see something gentler in them, wooden or woven containers, translated into permanent stone, placed beside a child too young to have lived a full life, perhaps so that something soft and ordinary could go with them into the dark. There is a particular kind of ache in an object built for comfort that we can no longer read. We know exactly where it was placed and exactly who it was placed beside. We simply do not know what it was meant to say, and it would not be the last time archaeologists found themselves standing over a child's grave holding an unreadable question. Fact 4. Along the flat, damp fields of late Iron Age Britain, small bronze tools begin to appear in the ground, usually in pairs, sometimes in threes, joined together by a small ring so they would not be lost. One half looks like a tiny curved trough, the other looks like a small blunt rod, or occasionally a little rocking cradle shape. Archaeologists call them cosmetic grinders, and under a microscope, the wear patterns are unmistakable. A lateral, back and forth grinding motion. Exactly the kind of motion you would use to crush something soft between two surfaces. So the mystery here is gentler than most. It is not what the object is, it is what it once held. No residue has ever survived inside one, not after 2,000 years in acidic British soil. Was it a medicine, a perfume, a cosmetic paste for a special occasion? Perhaps something meant to dull pain or to sharpen the senses before a ritual. Imagine a small tool passed between hands at a bedside, ground gently against skin or bole, for a purpose that felt completely obvious to everyone in the room at the time, and then was never written down, because who writes down the obvious things happening in their own kitchen? That, more than any grand monument, is often the real shape of an unsolved mystery, a private, ordinary motion that outlived every person who understood it. Fact 5. In the volcanic plains of central Turkey, in a village called Tepecik Çiftlik, hunters 9,000 years ago were shaping obsidian into arrowheads sharper than surgical steel. Most of those arrowheads are unremarkable, hundreds of them, all similar, all functional. But scattered among them, only 54 in total after 4 decades of careful excavation, are arrowheads with a fine, deliberate incision cut across their glassy black surface, a tiny scar of a pattern that took real effort to make. Here is the strange part researchers only recently worked out. Obsidian cannot scratch obsidian. To carve these lines, the maker needed a harder material, flint, which makes up barely 1% of the stone flakes found at the site. Someone had to go out of their way, seek out a rarer stone, and carve their arrowhead not once, but sometimes 20 separate times to leave a mark, before ever loosing it at prey. No 2 incisions match. They appear on the center of some points and the edges of others. They show up in no graves, no special burials, nothing to suggest ceremony. It is as if, every so often, across 1,000 years and many generations, one hunter in a crowd decided their arrow needed to say something, quietly, only to themselves. We may never learn what. But the very fact that it happened again and again, in a pattern too rare to be accident and too varied to be tradition, tells us something tender about the people who made it. Even the most practical objects, it seems, sometimes carried a private thought inside them. Fact 6. In the tomb of a First Dynasty Egyptian official named Sabu, buried at Saqqara around 5,000 years ago, archaeologists in 1936 lifted out a stone bowl unlike anything else from its era. It is thin, carved from a delicate banded siltstone, with 3 graceful curving wings rising from its rim like the blades of a turbine or the spokes of a steering wheel. It had shattered into pieces in the ground, and once carefully reassembled, its strange, almost mechanical elegance immediately drew wild theories, an ancient hydraulic device, even a fragment of some impossible flying machine. The quieter, far more likely truth is gentler than any of that. Wide, shallow stone bowls were common burial offerings in this period, meant to hold food or oil for the journey into the afterlife. What makes the Sabu disc different is simply its extraordinary fragility. Metasilt stone, this thin, would have shattered under any regular use, meaning it was never meant to hold a meal at all. It was made purely to be beautiful, purely to be placed gently beside a person who could no longer eat, as a gesture rather than a tool. There is something moving in that. A civilization capable of carving stone thinner than we can easily replicate today, spending that skill not on weapons or wealth, but on a single, useless, gorgeous bowl, meant only to travel with someone into the dark. We tend to reach for the exotic explanation first. Sometimes the true one is simply love, expressed in a material that could not possibly last, and somehow did. Fact 7. Deep in the mountains of western Iran, in a region called Luristan, farmers in the 1920s began pulling extraordinary bronze objects from the earth. Curling standards topped with human figures gripping wild animals by the throat, elaborate horse harness pieces alive with lions and griffins, delicate pins whose purpose is still debated. By the time archaeologists arrived to study them properly, looters had already stripped away the layers of soil that would have told us exactly who made them and when, leaving the bronzes beautiful but nearly homeless, floating somewhere between the 11th and 7th centuries before our era, and between at least two very different ancient peoples who might have made them. Picture uncovering a stranger's toolbox, full of exquisite, clearly meaningful objects, but with every label torn away. The recurring image across the bronzes, a human master gripping animals on either side, appears from Mesopotamia to Egypt, a shared visual language for humanity's old wish to hold dominion over the wild world. Later excavations, done with patience instead of haste, eventually recovered a little context, enough to date the bronzes with more confidence. But the deeper question, who exactly these highland craftspeople were, nomads or settled smiths, Medes or wandering Cimmerians, remains open. It is a reminder that the past is not only lost through the passage of time, sometimes it is lost simply because someone dug too quickly, chasing treasure instead of truth, and by the time care arrived, the story had already slipped through their fingers. Fact 8. Nearly every ancient culture eventually built games, dice, small tokens for chance and play. So when archaeologists in Norton Disney, England, uncovered a Roman dodecahedron in the summer of 2023, on the second to last day of a small community excavation, it briefly seemed the mystery might finally be closing. It was not. This particular dodecahedron was remarkable for being whole, undamaged, gleaming, with no wear at all on any of its careful edges, as though it had been placed into its pit deliberately, on purpose, in excellent condition, rather than lost or discarded. Chemical analysis found it was cast from a careful blend of copper, tin, and lead, a costly and skilled undertaking for an object with no practical use anyone has ever been able to prove. Consider the strange gentleness of that. Whoever buried it did not lose it in the mud by accident. They placed a beautiful, expensive, functionless object into the earth and walked away. Archaeologists now lean toward a ritual explanation, an offering, perhaps, to something unseen in a Roman world thick with everyday superstition and half-remembered local gods. The volunteers who found it have returned to that same field again and again since, still hoping the surrounding soil might finally explain what its maker wanted it to do. So far, the ground has kept its silence. And that silence, more than the object itself, is really what makes archaeology feel alive. The sense that even now, this very year, somebody's field could still be hiding the missing piece. Fact 9. Not every mystery from the ancient world was ever meant to be solved by us, and one of the strangest sits quietly today in a museum case in Athens, Greece, as a lump of green, corroded bronze that most visitors walk past without a second glance. It was pulled from a shipwreck near the island of Antikythera in 1901, and for decades, nobody understood what they were looking at. Only slowly, through X-rays and careful study across more than a century, did researchers realize it was a geared mechanical device built around 2,000 years ago, containing over 30 interlocking bronze gears, capable of tracking the sun, the moon, the phases of the sky, and even predicting eclipses. Nothing else like it survives from the ancient world. Nothing else even close to its complexity appears again for well over 1,000 years. It is, quite simply, out of place in time, a machine so far ahead of its era that when it was first properly understood, some scholars refused to believe it was genuinely ancient at all. And here is the newest twist. Recent engineering simulations suggest the device may have jammed after only about 4 months of use, its gears grinding to a halt like a printer stuck mid-page. Perhaps it never worked reliably at all. Perhaps it worked perfectly, and time simply bent its bronze out of true. Either way, somewhere in the ancient Greek world, someone dreamed up a small brass universe, and then the ship carrying it sank and carried the rest of that dream down with it, waiting 2,000 years in the dark and the cold and the salt for someone patient enough to bring it back into the light. Fact 10. In 1936, near Baghdad, workers excavating an ancient settlement uncovered something small enough to hold in one hand, and strange enough to launch a mystery that has never fully closed. A simple clay jar, no taller than a wine bottle, containing a rolled copper cylinder and a corroded iron rod, sealed together with tar. When modern researchers built careful replicas and filled them with something acidic, like lemon juice, the assembly produced a small, genuine electrical current somewhere close to 2 volts. For decades, this fed a tantalizing theory that ancient craftspeople in Mesopotamia had somehow discovered electricity nearly 2,000 years before Alessandro Volta built his famous battery in Italy. But look a little closer, the way patient archaeologists eventually did, and the theory grows fragile. No wires have ever been found near it, anywhere. There is no way to attach anything useful to the sealed metal core inside. And the jar strongly resembles other objects from the same region, sacred vessels used to hold written prayers and incantations, sealed away and buried as offerings meant to trap evil spirits rather than to spark a current. So perhaps this was never a battery at all, only a small clay prayer, holding words instead of electricity, sealed against the dark. And in a final twist that feels almost too fitting, many of the original artifacts vanished entirely during the chaos and looting of a museum in 2003, meaning today's researchers argue over photographs and careful drawings of an object that, quite literally, is no longer there to answer for itself. We began this part of our journey holding small, strange objects in our own 2 hands, a shape with no board, a bowl too fragile to use, a jar mistaken for a battery. Small things, easy to overlook, and yet each one carries a full, unanswered sentence from a life we will never fully understand. But what if the mystery is not the object at all, but the words that were meant to sit beside it? Let us move now into the second part of tonight's journey and listen for the languages that history has gone completely silent on. Fact 11. On the island of Crete, between 1800 and 1450 years before our era, the Minoan civilization kept careful records on small clay tablets, rows of neat, linear symbols pressed in while the clay was still soft. Archaeologists call the script Linear A, and for most of the 20th century, it sat beside its more famous cousin, Linear B, which was triumphantly deciphered in the 1950s and revealed to be an early form of Greek. Linear A never gave up its secret the same way. The two scripts share many symbols, almost like modern Greek and the Cyrillic alphabet share a common shape. But when scholars sound out Linear A using the same values, the resulting words are not Greek at all. They are not any language anyone has ever managed to identify. Whatever tongue the Minoans spoke to each other in their palaces over their harvests has no name today. Historians simply call it Minoan, a placeholder for an absence. Picture flipping through someone's private ledger, able to tell instantly which columns are numbers, which are names, which are goods being counted, and yet never able to read a single sentence of meaning. That is precisely where Linear A leaves us, 3,700 years later. Most of the surviving texts fit onto less than 2 pages of ordinary paper, too little material for the patterns to fully reveal themselves. Teams have even tried feeding it into computers built specifically to hunt for hidden connections to other ancient languages. The machine, after years of searching, found nothing. The silence held. Fact 12. Sail far to the east, across the Arabian Sea, to the great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, and you find yourself among the ruins of the Indus Valley civilization, one of the largest and most advanced societies of the ancient world, thriving between 2600 and 1900 years before our era. Its people left behind thousands of small, carefully carved stamp seals, each one stamped with a short row of pictographic symbols, alongside images of unicorn-like bulls, elephants, and other animals. And here is the strangest part of all. Nearly every inscription is astonishingly short, most only 4 or 5 symbols long, never once approaching the length of a full sentence. So short, in fact, that a genuine scholarly debate still rages over whether this was ever a full written language at all, or something closer to a simplified system of merchants' marks, the ancient equivalent of a shipping label rather than a story. No bilingual inscription has ever surfaced to give us a way in, no Rosetta Stone equivalent pairing Indus symbols with a language we already understand. The stakes of solving it are large enough that, in recent years, the government of the Indian state of Tamil Nadu offered $1 million to anyone who could finally crack it. Nobody has claimed the prize. Somewhere in those brief, repeated little symbols may be the names of merchants, the units of ancient trade, or perhaps something far more personal, and until the missing piece surfaces, an entire civilization's inner voice remains folded shut, like a letter nobody has been given permission to open. Fact 13. Halfway across the world, on the most remote inhabited island on Earth, a very different kind of writing waited quietly in the dark, carved into wooden boards by the Rapa Nui people of Easter Island. European missionaries first documented the script, called Rongo Rongo, in the 1860s. By then, the knowledge of how to read it had already slipped away, lost in the same wave of disease and disruption that devastated so much of the island's population and memory. Today, only about 24 wooden tablets survive, scattered across museums, an ocean away from the island that made them. The glyphs are read in an unusual, almost hypnotic pattern called reversed boustrophodon, meaning you read one line left to right, then must rotate the tablet completely upside down to read the next line right to left, over and over, like a mind quietly folding back on itself. A few scattered fragments seem to correspond to a lunar calendar, and possibly a genealogy, brief flashes of meaning in an otherwise unbroken dark. Recent radiocarbon testing on one particular tablet, kept in Rome, produced something wonderful and unsettling all at once. A date from the mid-1400s, more than 3 centuries before Europeans ever reached the island's shore. If that early date holds up under further study, it means the Rapa Nui people may have invented writing entirely on their own, independently, in complete isolation, one of only a small handful of times in all of human history that this has ever happened. And then, quietly, before anyone thought to ask them how it worked, the people who could read it were gone. Fact 14. In the summer of 1908, on the island of Crete, an Italian archaeologist named Luigi Pernier lifted a small clay disc from an underground deposit at the palace ruins of Phaistos, surrounded by ash and burned bone. It fit easily in the palm of one hand, about the size of a small saucer, and both of its faces were covered in a spiral of stamped, hand-pressed symbols, little pictures of a walking man, a fish, a shield, a flower, 45 different signs in total, arranged in careful little groupings from the outer rim inward toward the center. What makes the Phaistos disc so strange is not simply that nobody can read it. It is that nobody has ever found anything remotely like it anywhere else in the ancient world, before or since. The symbols were not scratched by hand like linear A. They were pressed with individual carved stamps, an almost printing press-like technique, more than 3,000 years before printing was supposedly invented. Some scholars hear a hymn in its rhyming, repeating phrases. Others see a calendar, a board game, even a letter written to a goddess of fertility. And because the language underneath it remains entirely unknown, every proposed translation, no matter how confident its author sounds, is really only an educated guess dressed up as certainty. It sits today behind glass in a museum in Crete, this one perfect, self-contained little universe of meaning, still spinning its spiral thoughts quietly into a silence that has now outlasted every civilization that came after it. Fact 15. Far to the east of Crete, in the mountains of ancient Iran, a script called Linear Elamite sat almost completely forgotten by history, rare enough that for most of the 20th century, scholars barely had enough surviving examples to even begin studying it seriously. That changed slowly, patiently, through the work of a French archaeologist named François Dessay, who spent years staring at silver vessels and inscribed objects, waiting for a pattern to reveal itself. His breakthrough came not from finding new evidence, but from making what he later called a creative leap, realizing the script was not a mix of pictures and sounds like most ancient writing, but something rarer, a purely phonetic alphabet, built from just 17 signs representing vowels and consonants. If that reading holds, it quietly rewrites the history of writing itself, making Linear Elamite older than what was previously considered humanity's very first true alphabet. In 2022, Deset and his colleagues announced they could sound out nearly every character in the entire surviving collection. But here is where the mystery lingers on, gently, refusing to fully close. Sounding out a script is only half of reading it. The underlying Elamite language itself remains largely a mystery, so even with almost every letter now understood, Deset can only make out scattered words: king, devotion, servant, a handful of fragile human phrases drifting up out of nearly 4,000 years of silence, like hearing someone's voice clearly through a wall, without being able to make out most of what they are actually saying. Fact 16. Even scripts we can technically read sometimes carry mysteries of their own, and one of the strangest sits not in stone or clay, but in fabric, in a burial cloth traditionally linked to the crucifixion, and first documented in written history in the year 1357. Radiocarbon testing has dated the linen itself to somewhere between 1260 and 1390, placing its creation firmly in the medieval period rather than the ancient world, and yet the puzzle at its center has nothing to do with its age. It is the image itself, a faint, sepia-toned human form, visible in astonishing, photograph-like detail only when the cloth is converted into a photographic negative, a discovery not made until 1898, 5.5 centuries after the cloth first appeared. Think about that for a moment. Whoever created this image, centuries before photography existed, somehow embedded a negative image into cloth, using a method nobody has been able to fully replicate or confidently explain. Proposed answers range from a lost medieval painting technique to a scorching or rubbing process to unusual chemical reactions in aged linen. Every hypothesis that has tried to challenge the radiocarbon dating itself has since been scientifically set aside. So we are left holding two separate mysteries stitched into the very same object, a puzzle of exactly when it was made, now reasonably well answered, and a puzzle of exactly how its haunting image was formed, which remains, even with modern imaging technology, stubbornly, quietly unsolved. Fact 17. Return with me now to the desert plains of Turkey, near a low hill the locals once called simply Belly Hill, where in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt found something that would eventually rewrite the opening chapter of human civilization. Beneath that quiet hillside lay massive carved limestone pillars arranged in careful circles, some standing over 5 meters tall and weighing as much as 10 tons, decorated with foxes, scorpions, snakes, and vultures carved in low relief. Radiocarbon dating placed them at over 11,000 years old, more than 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, built by people who, as far as anyone can tell, had not yet invented pottery, farming, or even domesticated animals. For years, the accepted story was elegant and moving, that religion itself, The human need to gather and build something sacred together came first, and farming followed only afterward, born from the practical need to feed the crowds who kept returning to build and rebuild this hilltop cathedral. Every few decades, mysteriously, the builders would deliberately bury their own finished pillars under rubble and raise a fresh, smaller circle inside the old one, again and again, for well over 1,000 years. More recent digging has complicated that beautiful story further still, uncovering hints of houses, grain processing tools, even a rainwater collection system, suggesting people may have lived here permanently after all. Even Schmidt, before he passed away, admitted the site kept producing 2 new mysteries for every one it solved. Nobody yet knows, with real confidence, why those pillars were built, why they were so carefully buried, or what those glaring stone animals were meant to guard against, out here on this quiet hill under a Turkish sky. Fact 18. In the volcanic desert basin of Qinghai province in China, near a salt lake called Toson, a writer exploring a remote escarpment in 1996 noticed a strange triangular opening carved into the hillside and stepped inside to investigate. What he found looked, at first glance, remarkably manufactured. An array of narrow, rust-colored pipes rising directly out of the stone floor and embedded in the surrounding cave walls, with more pipes scattered across the nearby lakeshore. Laboratory testing on samples sent away for analysis found the material was overwhelmingly ordinary, mostly common minerals, with no unusual composition to suggest advanced ancient metalwork. The leading, far gentler explanation offered by most geologists is that these are fossilized casts of ancient tree roots, hollow mineral tubes left behind after the wood inside them decayed away over countless centuries, a natural process that can, under the right conditions, produce shapes eerily reminiscent of engineered piping. And yet the site remains only partially studied, tucked away in one of the most remote corners of the country, difficult to access, difficult to fully survey. What is genuinely strange is not necessarily the pipes themselves, but how readily the human mind reaches for engineering and intention when it encounters an unfamiliar shape in the landscape, and how patiently the actual answer, ordinary geology working slowly across deep time, waits underneath every dramatic theory for someone curious enough and careful enough to go and actually look closely. Fact 19. Sometimes an unreadable script does not come from a lost civilization at all, but from a modern piece of art, mistaken, almost by accident, for something impossibly old. In 2012, an artist shaped wet clay into the unmistakable form of a mobile telephone, complete with rows of small square buttons pressed carefully into its surface, intending it purely as a playful sculpture. Somewhere along the way, a photograph of that sculpture escaped its original context and traveled, as photographs now do, far beyond the artist's control. It resurfaced online, labeled as an 800-year-old archaeological discovery, an impossible object from the deep past, and the story spread through video after video before anyone traced it back to its true, recent origin. There is something quietly instructive in that small, modern mystery. It shows us, in miniature, exactly how the older, genuine puzzles of archaeology so often grow their reputations, a strange shape separated from its true story, drifting through curious hands until wonder outpaces evidence. It is a gentle reminder to hold our amazement a little loosely, to enjoy the strangeness of an object while still asking patiently where it truly came from. Because sometimes the answer really is simple, even when the internet and our own hopeful imaginations would much rather it stayed impossible. Fact 20. Let us end this part of our journey with a script found on Etruscan tablets in Italy, spoken by a civilization that ruled central Italy for centuries before Rome ever rose to take its place. Unlike the Minoans or the Rapa Nui, we can actually sound out Etruscan letters perfectly well. Its alphabet borrowed heavily from Greek, and scholars can read the words aloud with total confidence. The mystery is not the letters, it is the meaning underneath them. Etruscan does not appear closely related to any other known language family in ancient Europe, Indo-European or otherwise, leaving it oddly isolated, a linguistic island with no clear neighbors. Most of what survives are short funerary inscriptions, names, titles, family relationships, just enough to tell us this person existed and was loved, without ever unlocking the deeper grammar of how these people truly thought, argued, joked, or told each other stories at the end of a long day. We now return to our small, warm circle of listeners, having wandered through Minoan spreadsheets, an Indus merchant stamp, a Rapa Nui calendar, an Elamite king's devotion, and an Etruscan family's grief, 5 different silences, each holding real human voices we can almost, but not quite, hear. Perhaps meaning was never really the point of tonight's search. Perhaps it is enough, for now, simply to know these words exist, waiting patiently, the way a favorite song waits patiently on a shelf for the one afternoon, years from now, when someone finally sits down and learns how to play it. From here, let us step outside these small clay tablets and small bronze objects and out into the open air, toward the stones too large for any human hand to lift alone. Fact 21. On the wide grass plain of Salisbury, England, the standing stones of Stonehenge have watched over that landscape for roughly 4,500 years. And yet, if you stand at the site today, you are not looking at the complete monument at all. You are looking at what survived. An antiquary named John Aubrey noticed strange hollows in the ground as far back in the 1660s, and centuries of careful digging since have confirmed his suspicion. An entire outer circle of smaller stones, along with several other rings, once stood here and are now simply gone, vanished, their empty holes, the only proof they ever existed at all. Where did they go? Some were very likely broken apart by local visitors over the centuries, tempted by old rumors that a chip of Stonehenge carried healing power. So many hammer marks scar the remaining stones that historical accounts describe hammers being available to rent nearby. Others may have been quietly moved elsewhere, repurposed into farmhouses or field walls long before anyone thought the missing stones mattered. So even Stonehenge, arguably the single most studied monument on Earth, is best understood today as a monument to absence as much as presence, a puzzle whose missing pieces were stolen not by time alone, but by the ordinary, curious hands of people who came long after its builders, wanting a small piece of something they did not fully understand either. Fact 22. At the very center of that same stone circle lies a single flat slab known as the altar stone, and for nearly a century, geologists assumed they already understood where it came from, the same corner of Wales that supplied Stonehenge's smaller blue stones. They were wrong. In 2024, an international research team traced the altar stone's mineral fingerprint using two tiny chips taken from museum specimens, one knocked loose during an 1844 inspection, another recovered from a 1920s excavation. Cutting-edge dating technology traced its true origin not to Wales at all, but to the far northeastern edge of Scotland, more than 400 miles away. Sit with that distance for a moment. 400 miles over Bronze Age terrain, without wheels suited to the task, without draft animals capable of dragging 6 tons of stone that far, delivered somehow to a single hillside in southern England, alongside dozens of other massive stones from entirely different directions. It is, quite simply, the most well-traveled megalith ever identified at Stonehenge, and nobody yet has a confident answer for exactly how, or precisely why, it made a journey that length. Perhaps that stone was not just building material. Perhaps carrying it such an extraordinary distance was itself the entire point, a shared act of devotion stretched across the length of a nation, proof of unity offered up in solid stone. We may never know for certain. We only know, now, exactly how far someone was willing to go. Fact 23. In the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon stand the ruins of Baalbek, a Roman temple complex built atop a platform of stones so enormous that modern engineers still debate, openly and without full agreement, exactly how ancient builders ever lifted them into place. 3 of these blocks, known together as the Trilithon, each weigh somewhere close to 800 tons. To put that gently into perspective, that is roughly the weight of 2 loaded jumbo jets, quarried nearly a kilometer away, and somehow transported, lifted, and precisely fitted into a wall now nearly 19 centuries old. And the quarry itself holds an even stranger clue. Still resting there today, never fully freed from the bedrock, lies an even larger unfinished stone the locals have long called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, abandoned mid-carving, as though the builders reached, at some point, the very edge of what was possible, and simply stopped. Recent research has proposed clever solutions: temporary rolling flanges carved into the stone itself, capstans and ropes converting a heavy drag into a smoother, controlled roll. It is elegant on paper. Whether it matches what truly happened 19 centuries ago remains gently unconfirmed until someone finds direct evidence in the shape of ancient rope grooves or trackways. This remains one of engineering history's most respected, most patient, most open questions. Fact 24. High in the wind-swept Altiplano of Bolivia, at an elevation over 12,000 feet, sits the ruined complex of Puma Punku, part of the larger Tiwanaku civilization, first raised around 1,500 years ago. What survives there today is a scattering of massive interlocking stone blocks, cut with such flawless, mathematically sharp right angles that architectural historians who studied the site directly admitted they could not identify what tools were used to achieve it. Their own careful experiments replicating the carving using stone blades, flint, and obsidian, managed only a small fraction of the same precision, and took many painstaking hours to produce even that much. No stoneworking tools capable of this level of finish have ever been recovered anywhere at the site, only simple hammerstones, which cannot explain the crisp interior angles found throughout the ruins. The blocks were also clearly meant to be interchangeable, cut with such uniform precision that any one stone could be swapped with another, and the wall would still sit perfectly level. It is easy to understand why Puma Punku has become a magnet for wilder theories involving lost civilizations and visitors from beyond the stars. The more grounded, and honestly more remarkable truth, is simply this. A society working at over 12,000 feet, without iron, without the wheel as we understand it, achieved a level of stone precision that professional modern masons still find genuinely difficult to reproduce, using tools that have never once been found. Fact 25. In southern Spain, near the town of Antequera, sits a Neolithic tomb called the Menga Dolmen, built nearly 6,000 years ago, 1,000 years before Stonehenge, from 32 colossal stone slabs. The largest single stone in the entire structure weighs an estimated 150 tons, nearly 5 times heavier than anything used at Stonehenge, quarried from soft, fragile sandstone that could easily have cracked under its own weight during transport. For years, this seemed almost like an engineering contradiction. Enormous stones carved from a material too delicate to survive careless handling. Then, in 2024, a decade-long study finally worked out the answer, and it turned out these Neolithic builders understood something remarkable: the physics of an arch, applied to the great roof capstone nearly 6,000 years before that principle appears anywhere else in the historical record. They shaped the underside of the stone so its center rose slightly higher than its edges, gently redistributing the weight the same way a modern architectural arch does, and buried a third of every standing wall stone directly into hand-carved bedrock sockets for extra stability, in a region known for earthquakes no less. As one lead researcher put it plainly, if a modern engineer tried to rebuild Menga today with the resources available 6,000 years ago, they doubted it could even be done. Sometimes the deepest mystery is simply how quietly brilliant the ancient world truly was, hiding in plain sight under 6,000 years of assumed simplicity. Fact 26. Off the eastern shore of the small Pacific island of Pohnpei lies a place its people still call the Reef of Heaven, a sprawling city built not on land at all, but directly on top of a coral reef spread across nearly 100 small artificial islands connected by tidal canals. Its walls rise from stacked columns of dark, naturally hexagonal basalt rock, logs of stone laid crosswise like enormous, careful campfire kindling, some of those columns weighing many tons each, quarried from volcanic sites on the far side of the island, and floated or rafted across open water to be stacked, without mortar, into walls that still stand today after roughly 8 centuries of tropical storms and rising tides. There are no draft animals native to this remote Pacific island, no wheels suited to reef travel, and yet somehow an entire ceremonial and burial city, home at its height to a ruling dynasty and its many priests, rose up out of the shallow water, stone by patient stone. Local oral history offers its own quiet, poetic answer, that the stones were lifted into place through magic, chanted and floated into position by two powerful sorcerer brothers. Archaeologists lean toward extraordinary, sustained human coordination instead. Generations of labor moving stone across water, using rafts, ropes, and sheer collective will. Either explanation asks us to imagine an achievement almost too large for its own remote, quiet corner of the Pacific to have produced alone. Fact 27. In the highlands of modern Zimbabwe, curling gently across a hillside above the Zimbabwe Plateau, stand the dry stone walls of a city that gave the entire country its name. Built and expanded across several centuries, reaching its height around the 1300s. The walls rise as high as 36 feet in places, built from carefully shaped granite blocks, stacked with such extraordinary precision that no mortar was ever needed to hold them together, an achievement so impressive that, for much of the colonial era, European visitors simply refused to believe it had been built by African hands at all, inventing theories about Phoenician traders or a wandering biblical queen instead, despite abundant evidence to the contrary. Modern archaeology has thoroughly corrected that old, prejudiced record, confirming Great Zimbabwe as the capital of a thriving Shona trading civilization, wealthy enough to import glass beads and Chinese porcelain from far along the Indian Ocean trade routes. What still remains genuinely open to study is the quieter, more human question: exactly why such a wealthy, powerful capital was eventually abandoned sometime in the 15th century, its great stone enclosures left to the grass and the wind. Overworked farmland, a changing climate, shifting trade routes, all remain live possibilities. What is no longer in question, thankfully, is who built it, though it took the world embarrassingly long to simply believe what the stones had been saying all along. Fact 28. High in the Andes above the old Inca capital of Cusco, Peru, rise the zigzagging stone walls of Sacsayhuaman, built from limestone blocks so enormous that some individual stones weigh well over 100 tons, fitted together with a precision so exact that, famously, not even a thin blade can slide into the seam between them. No mortar holds these walls together at all. Each stone is individually shaped, an irregular, almost puzzle piece silhouette, locking snugly against its neighbors in a pattern engineers now recognize as remarkably effective, earthquake-resistant architecture, flexing slightly during tremors rather than shattering outright, which likely explains why so much of it still stands solid centuries later, while colonial Spanish buildings nearby have crumbled and been rebuilt again and again. The Inca themselves left no written blueprints, no surviving engineering manual explaining their exact quarrying and fitting methods, only oral history describing enormous, sustained communal labor and the finished stones as our real evidence. What is quietly beautiful here is the sheer patience implied by every single seam. Each irregular stone had to be measured, tested, filed, and retested against its neighbor over and over, until it fit with an accuracy modern quarrying equipment still struggles to casually match. It is not a mystery of impossible forces. It is a mystery of impossible patience, an entire civilization simply willing to take as long as perfection required. Fact 29. In China's Zhejiang province in 1992, a local villager decided to finally drain a set of small ponds that generations of families had always been warned never to swim in, believing them to be bottomless. What emerged instead of a bottomless lake were vast cathedral-like underground caverns, carved entirely by hand out of solid rock. Today, 24 separate chambers have been identified in the immediate area, some large enough to comfortably hold more than 1,000 people, their smooth walls and ceilings covered edge to edge in perfectly parallel, closely spaced chisel marks, a rhythm so consistent across the entire site that researchers believe the work must have followed a single, carefully organized master plan. Here is the truly strange part. Not one historical document, not one local legend passed down through generations, not one inscription anywhere within the caves themselves records who built them, why, or even roughly when. Geological dating suggests the work is at least a couple of thousand years old, an engineering project on the scale of a small underground city, and somehow entirely, completely unmentioned in any surviving record from the civilization that must have organized it. It is a rare and eerie kind of mystery, not a monument too old for writing to have existed yet, but a monument built during an era that absolutely did have writing, and simply chose, for reasons entirely its own, never to write this particular achievement down. Fact 30. Let us close this stretch of our journey on Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, where nearly 900 carved stone figures called moai stand watch over the coastline, some standing over 30 feet tall and weighing more than 80 tons, carved from volcanic stone at a single quarry and somehow moved, on average, several miles across rough terrain to their final resting platforms. For decades, the assumption was straightforward and grim, that thousands of laborers dragged each moai flat on wooden sledges, consuming the island's forests in the process, until the whole ecosystem collapsed. Then, in a set of careful experiments beginning in the 2010s, researchers tried something the island's own oral history had been suggesting all along: rocking a replica statue gently from side to side using ropes tied at careful angles, coaxing it into a slow, rhythmic waddle across open ground. It worked. With only 18 people and 3 ropes, a research team walked a 10-foot replica statue 100 meters in under an hour, the statue appearing, from a distance, almost to be walking on its own. It is a small, wonderful correction to an old and unfair story, less a tale of reckless deforestation, and more a story of choreography, patience, and genuine cleverness, an entire community learning to make stone move the way water moves, with rhythm instead of raw brute force. The island still holds real unanswered questions about its history, but at least on this one point, the ancient story and the modern experiment finally seem to agree. We have spent this stretch of the night among stones too heavy for any single person to lift, and yet somehow lifted anyway. But size was never really the whole story. Some of the most baffling objects from the ancient world are not large at all, but strangely, impossibly clever. Let us look now at the machines, the metals, and the quiet technologies that seem to have arrived centuries before their proper time. Fact 31. In a courtyard in Delhi, India, stands an iron pillar just over 23 feet tall. cast and raised more than 1600 years ago during the Gupta Empire, and it has spent every single one of those 16 centuries standing outdoors, exposed to monsoon rain, blazing heat, and the ordinary slow decay that should, by any normal expectation, have reduced plain iron to rust and crumbling ruin within a few generations. Modern metallurgists studying the pillar found the answer was neither magic nor advanced ancient technology in the way popular legend often suggests, but something quieter and, in its own way, just as remarkable, a thin, accidental protective layer forming naturally on the iron's surface over centuries, created by an unusually high phosphorus content left behind from the specific forging method used, along with leftover slag inclusions from the original smelting process. Ancient smiths were not deliberately engineering rust resistance the way a modern chemist would. They were simply using their traditional forging method with a particular type of iron ore and stumbled, generation after generation, into a formula so effective that we are only now, with instruments they never had access to, beginning to fully understand why it worked as well as it did. There is something gently humbling in that. Not every ancient mystery hides advanced lost technology. Sometimes it hides advanced ordinary skill, repeated so patiently and so consistently over so many centuries that the result looks, to modern eyes standing in that same quiet courtyard, indistinguishable from magic. Fact 32. Along the coastline of the old Roman Empire, structures built more than 2,000 years ago still stand firm against the relentless erosion of ocean waves, their concrete piers and breakwaters holding strong long after most modern concrete, poured within our own lifetimes, has already begun visibly crumbling. For years, engineers assumed the secret was simply different ingredients, volcanic ash mixed with lime and seawater, producing a chemical reaction unlike our modern formulas. Recent research revealed something even more remarkable hiding inside that mixture: small white mineral deposits scattered through the concrete that scientists once assumed were simply flaws, sloppy mixing, evidence of lower quality control. Under close laboratory analysis, those white flecks turned out to be anything but sloppy. They are pockets of unreacted lime that, when the surrounding concrete inevitably develops a small crack over the centuries, dissolve slowly whenever rainwater or seawater seeps in and recrystallize directly within the gap, sealing the wound from the inside out. Roman concrete, it turns out, was quietly designed to heal itself. Modern researchers are now working to bring a version of this ancient self-healing method back into use, hoping to build coastal structures that could similarly outlast their own creators by thousands of years. It is a rare kind of mystery that ends not with a shrug, but with genuine hope, an ancient formula so good that our own century is now humbly trying to learn it back. Fact 33. In 1850, an archaeologist excavating the ruins of an Assyrian palace at Nimrud in modern-day Iraq uncovered a small, oval-shaped piece of polished rock crystal, ground with a slightly convex surface on one side, dating back nearly 2,700 years. Held up to sunlight, the crystal genuinely bends and concentrates light, enough to start a small fire or to slightly magnify a fine line of text. That simple, testable fact opened a debate that has never fully closed. Was this small, polished stone purely decorative inlay, a fine detail meant for a piece of furniture or jewelry? Or did the ancient Assyrians, more than 2,500 years before the telescope was formally invented in Europe, understand something genuine about the properties of ground lenses? One respected scholar went so far as to suggest it might have functioned as a rudimentary telescope, though the broader community of experts remains rightly unconvinced, noting that a single lens without a proper optical tube and eyepiece could not achieve any meaningful magnification of distant objects. And so the small crystal sits today in the British Museum, glinting quietly under its own display light, neither proven tool nor disproven ornament, a tiny circle of polished stone that genuinely, physically, bends light exactly the way a lens should, waiting patiently for archaeologists to decide, with confidence they do not yet have, exactly what an ancient Assyrian craftsman intended when they first picked it up and held it to the sun. Fact 34. Somewhere in the workshops of the medieval Islamic world, smiths were folding and forging a particular kind of steel, imported as ingots from India and Sri Lanka, into blades so sharp and so strong that European crusaders returned home telling stories of swords capable of slicing silk scarves out of the air, or cutting cleanly through lesser blades without so much as a chip. The technique for producing this steel, known today as Damascus steel, vanished sometime around the 18th century, its final master smiths dying without passing the exact formula onward, possibly because the specific mineral-rich ore deposits it depended on had simply run dry. Only in 2006 did modern materials scientists, examining an antique blade under an electron microscope, discover exactly why these swords performed the way they did, revealing carbon nanotubes and nanowires embedded directly within the metal's structure, an atomic-scale architecture that gave the steel its unusual combination of flexibility and hardness. Nanotechnology, essentially, forged by hand in a medieval workshop, centuries before anyone possessed a microscope capable of seeing what they had actually made. The smiths themselves almost certainly had no concept of atoms or nanostructures. They simply knew, through countless careful repetitions passed from master to apprentice, exactly which ore, exactly which heating and folding rhythm, produced a blade that sang a particular note when struck. We have only recently caught up to understanding why their careful, patient intuition worked so well. Fact 35. In the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire faced a series of overwhelming naval sieges, and somehow, again and again, turned the tide of battle, using a weapon so effective and so carefully guarded that its exact recipe has never been recovered. Historical accounts describe a liquid fire, launched from bronze tubes mounted on ships, that burned fiercely even while floating on open water, spreading terror through enemy fleets who had never encountered anything like it. The Byzantines called it simply sea fire and guarded the formula as one of the empire's most closely held state secrets, restricted to a single family of chemists whose knowledge was passed down so privately that when Constantinople finally fell in 1453, the precise recipe apparently fell with it, lost to history in the same catastrophe that ended the empire itself. Modern historians have proposed likely ingredients drawing on crude petroleum, resin, sulfur, and quicklime, based on descriptions in surviving texts, and later less effective imitations attempted by rival powers. But no complete, original recipe survives, and no modern reconstruction has ever fully matched the descriptions of a fire so persistent it reportedly kept burning even on the surface of the sea itself. It remains one of history's most successful examples of a secret kept exactly as intended, a weapon so effective it shaped the outcome of real battles for centuries, and so carefully protected that it slipped, quietly and completely, out of human memory the moment the empire guarding it finally fell. Fact 36. Beneath the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, Egypt's oldest pyramid, built more than 4,700 years ago, engineers have puzzled for over a century about exactly how ancient builders raised its stone blocks into place, layer by careful layer, to a height of more than 200 feet. In 2024, an interdisciplinary research team proposed something genuinely unexpected, mapping the surrounding desert watershed and discovering that a large stone enclosure near the pyramid, previously poorly understood, appears shaped almost exactly like a check dam, designed to trap seasonal floodwater and sediment. Following that water's path further, the team traced it into a long, carefully compartmented trench encircling the pyramid, its layout matching, almost precisely, the requirements of an ancient water treatment system, settling, filtering, and purifying the flow in careful stages. Their boldest proposal follows that water directly into a vertical shaft inside the pyramid itself, suggesting a wooden float, rising and falling as the shaft filled and drained with clean water, may have gently lifted a platform loaded with stone blocks upward from the center outward, almost like an ancient elevator built entirely from water pressure and patience. Not every Egyptologist is convinced, and the debate remains genuinely open, with respected researchers questioning whether the region ever held enough seasonal rainfall to power such a system reliably. But the proposal itself is a lovely reminder that even our oldest, most thoroughly studied monuments can still surprise us, hiding a plausible new secret in plain sight, in ordinary desert stone that had simply never been asked the right question before. Fact 37. For generations, one of the quiet frustrations of Egyptology has been a simple geographic puzzle: why the vast majority of ancient Egypt's pyramids cluster along a narrow desert strip that today sits nowhere near the Nile River, stranded, seemingly far from the water that should have made transporting their enormous stones even remotely possible. In 2024, researchers finally found the missing piece, buried, quite literally, beneath centuries of sand and drifting farmland. Using radar satellite imagery capable of penetrating the desert surface, combined with careful sediment sampling, a research team mapped out an entire lost branch of the Nile, roughly 40 miles long, that once flowed directly along the base of the pyramid plateau before gradually drying up and vanishing beneath the shifting desert. They named it the Ahramat branch, meaning simply the pyramids in Arabic, and its discovery quietly resolves a mystery that had lingered for well over a century. The ancient Egyptians were not somehow dragging colossal stone blocks for miles across open desert sand after all. They were floating them gently along a river that has since disappeared so completely that modern maps forgot it ever existed. It is a gentle reminder that landscapes themselves are not fixed, unchanging witnesses to history. They drift, dry up, and rewrite themselves over the centuries, quietly erasing the very clues that once would have made an ancient mystery obvious, until someone finally thinks to look underneath the sand instead of only at what remains on top of it. Fact 38. In the 1st century before our era, a Roman engineer and writer named Vitruvius described devices built centuries earlier by a Greek inventor named Ctesibius, and by his intellectual successor, Hero of Alexandria: water organs that played music automatically, coin-operated machines that dispensed holy water at temple doors, and small mechanical figures that moved along tracks, powered by weights, water pressure, and carefully balanced counterweights, essentially the earliest known programmable machines in recorded history. Hero even described, in surviving written works, a simple steam-powered sphere that spun rapidly when heated, technically the earliest known steam engine, built as a clever curiosity rather than any kind of practical machine. Roughly 17 centuries before the Industrial Revolution would finally put that same basic principle to serious use. None of Hero's actual devices survive today, only his careful written descriptions and diagrams, detailed enough that modern engineers have successfully built working replicas directly from his ancient instructions. The genuine mystery here is not whether these machines existed. It is why a civilization that clearly understood the basic principles of steam power, automation, and simple programmable movement never pursued those ideas any further, treating them instead as clever entertainment for temples and wealthy households rather than the seed of an industrial age that would not properly arrive for almost 2,000 more years. Sometimes the missing piece of history is not a lost technology at all. It is a lost curiosity, an idea that simply never found the right society at the right moment, willing to take it seriously. Fact 39. Across the murals, pottery, and temple walls of the ancient Maya world, one particular color appears again and again, an extraordinarily vivid, durable blue, painted onto sacrificial offerings, ceremonial pottery, and temple interiors, and remarkably resistant to fading, acid, and even modern solvents that would strip away almost any other ancient pigment within moments. Chemists eventually traced its secret to an unusual combination: indigo dye extracted from a local plant, bonded somehow with a specific type of clay called palygorskite, heated together in a process that locks the organic dye's molecules securely inside the clay's microscopic structure, protecting it from the natural decay that destroys nearly every other ancient pigment. Researchers rediscovered the basic recipe in the 1960s, and yet, even now, the exact temperature, timing, and preparation method used by actual Maya artisans remains only partially understood, reconstructed through careful modern experimentation rather than any surviving written instructions. Traces of the pigment recovered from a specific sacred cenote in Mexico suggest it was closely tied to ritual sacrifice, painted onto offerings, and sometimes onto people, moments before they were given to the sacred waters. There is something quietly moving in a color this durable, outlasting the empire that invented it, the language that named it, and nearly every other physical trace of the culture that first discovered how to trap a piece of living blue safely inside ordinary clay, patient enough to still be vivid on a museum wall 1,000 years later. Fact 40. On the west bank of the Nile in Egypt stand two enormous stone statues of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, each carved from a single block of quartzite sandstone and standing 60 feet tall. For centuries, ancient visitors making the long journey to see them reported something extraordinary, that at dawn, just as the first sunlight touched the northern statue, it would emit a soft, musical, singing sound, like a lyre string plucked gently in the distance. Greek and Roman travelers came from remarkably far away specifically to hear it, believing it to be the voice of a mythical hero greeting his mother, the goddess of dawn. Roman emperors themselves recorded visiting to listen. Then, in 199, a Roman emperor ordered repairs made to the badly earthquake-damaged statue, and the singing, quite abruptly, stopped for good and has never returned since. Modern researchers have a reasonably confident natural explanation that the earlier earthquake damage left small cracks in the stone, and as morning dew evaporated rapidly from those cracks in the sudden heat of sunrise, the escaping moisture and temperature change created a resonant sound, not unlike wind whistling faintly through a narrow gap. What is genuinely, permanently unrecoverable is not the mechanism itself, which we can reasonably explain, but the actual sound. No recording exists, no reliable written musical notation, only centuries of second-hand poetic description from ancient travelers who stood exactly where you might stand today, in the cool hush before sunrise, listening for a voice that stone no longer remembers how to make. We have spent this stretch of the night surrounded by clever hands, self-healing concrete, water-powered elevators, a fire that burned on the surface of the sea, a statue that once quietly sang, and then, one ordinary morning long ago, simply stopped. Cleverness, it turns out, is not only a modern invention. It has always been here, waiting patiently in stone and metal and clay for us to finally catch up and understand it. Let us go somewhere quieter now. Let us go beneath the surface of the water, where entire cities are still waiting, patiently, in the dark and the cold, for someone to finally come looking. Fact 41. Off the southern coast of Greece, resting beneath only 3 to 4 meters of clear Aegean water, lies what is thought to be the oldest submerged city ever mapped by archaeologists. Pavlopetri has been there for at least 4,000 years, swallowed by the sea in a series of earthquakes sometime between 1,000 and 2,000 years before our era. Its streets and buildings are not tumbled ruins. They are arranged, still, with the quiet logic of a living town, 12 or more separate buildings, a central public square, a cemetery, a warehouse district, and what appears to be an early cemetery containing stone-lined cist graves, all clearly visible to anyone who dives carefully through the shallow water. Picture a quiet Greek village, still bearing its street plan, still showing where the merchant stored his goods and where the family carried their dead, simply lowered gently into the sea one afternoon and never quite finished sinking. Everything is exactly where someone last left it. The doors just happen to be missing. Its streets align, intriguingly, with the prevailing winds, suggesting the people who laid them out had generations of knowledge about the local sea, a practical wisdom about living at the meeting point of water and land that ultimately could not save them when the land itself decided to shift. And somewhere in the silt around those stone walls, archaeologists believe there is still more: ceramic assemblages, personal objects, the ordinary portable remains of real daily life, still waiting gently under the surface. Fact 42. While Pavlopetri rested, forgotten beneath shallow Greek water, an even larger lost city waited under the silty darkness of Abu Qir Bay, off the Egyptian coast near Alexandria. Once called Thonis in Egyptian and Herakleion in Greek, it was, by all ancient accounts, one of the most significant port cities in the Mediterranean, a place where Greek merchants landing in Egypt were required to pay their customs duties before continuing inland, where temples rose to honor both Egyptian and Greek gods in the same breath, where a famous oracle made prophecies that people traveled from distant lands to hear. It sank sometime around the 2nd century of our era, slowly, as its foundations settled into a layer of unstable ancient sea clay that gradually liquefied under the combined weight of the city and its temples. Divers working with the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology have spent 2 decades carefully lifting its treasures from the riverbed. Enormous pink granite statues of gods, inscribed stelae, golden jewelry, bronze ritual vessels, coins still bright after 2,000 years in salt water. The scale of what remains underwater is still not fully known. Every carefully excavated season brings new surprises upward into the light. Thonis Herakleion was the busiest gateway to Egypt for centuries, and yet nobody in the modern world knew it had ever existed at all until a team of divers in the year 2000 looked down through 20 meters of dark water and saw it staring back at them. Fact 43. Off the southern coast of Yonaguni, Japan's westernmost island, a diver named Kihachiro Aratake descended through clear Pacific water in 1986 looking for hammerhead sharks, and instead found something that stopped him completely still in the current. A massive, geometric platform of stone lay below him, its edges sharp and regular, cut into broad, flat terraces that descended like a monumental staircase into the deep. What became known as the Yonaguni Monument rises roughly 8 stories off the seafloor, roughly 27 meters tall at its highest point, its sides showing clear right angles, flat faces, and what appear to be carved channels running in regular lines. The debate that followed has never fully resolved. Geologists point to Yonaguni's natural sandstone formations, noting that this type of rock commonly fractures in straight lines along natural fault plains, producing step-like formations without any human hand at all. Others measure the angles, the recurring proportions, what appears to be a large turtle-shaped rock formation nearby, and insist this could only have been worked. What nearly everyone agrees on is this: even if the basic structure is entirely natural, human beings had direct knowledge of it. Yonaguni was connected to the Asian mainland by a land bridge that submerged only when sea levels rose after the last ice age, roughly 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. If people walked that land bridge, some of them walked across what is now the underwater monument too, and whether they carved it or simply knew it and wondered at it, we cannot ask them anymore. Fact 44. Beneath the shallow waters of the Mediterranean, off the coast of what is now northern Israel, lies one of the most remarkable and least visited archaeological sites in the world. An entire Stone Age village called Atlit Yam, built on dry land and swallowed by the sea roughly 9,000 years ago. What makes Atlit Yam extraordinary is not just its age, but the condition of its preservation. In the oxygen-poor sediment beneath the waves, organic materials that would have rotted to nothing on land have been protected instead. Wooden posts still stand in their original positions. Animal bones preserve with their soft tissue traces intact. The remains of 36 human individuals have been lifted from the site, several of them buried with deliberate care, and in one case, a mother and child buried face to face, still holding each other's gaze across 9 millennia. There are also 7 massive stones arranged in a rough oval that researchers believe may be one of the earliest ritual structures ever found, standing upright in the sediment, not unlike a very small, very ancient version of the circles we find on land. Its people kept cattle, pigs, and goats, grew emmer wheat and lentils, fished the shallow sea, and seem to have lived in planned, organized houses with interior hearths. Then, sometime around 7,000 years before our era, the shoreline slowly shifted, the land around them dropped slightly, and the sea quietly walked inland and claimed their village without a single dramatic moment of collapse, only a gradual rising of water over years and decades, until one morning the last family carried what they could and walked away, leaving everything else behind, perfectly, patiently sealed beneath the waves. Fact 45. In the shallow coastal waters of Cardigan Bay in Wales, at very low tides, dark wooden shapes emerge from the sand at the water's edge, the preserved remnants of an ancient forest, still rooted in its original soil, stretching far out beneath the modern sea. The stumps are not small. Some of these trees were substantial oaks, standing in what was once a wide, inhabited lowland plain between 4,500 and 6,000 years ago, a landscape where people lived, hunted, farmed, and died on solid ground that is now, and has been for thousands of years, submerged beneath the Irish Sea. Welsh legend calls this vanished land Cantref Gwaelod, the Sunken Hundred, and carries stories of a drowned kingdom lost when its protective sea walls were left unmanned by a negligent keeper during a great storm. The Archaeology tells a gentler, sadder story, a gradual drowning over centuries as sea levels rose and the land itself slowly settled, a forest turning to salt marsh, then to intertidal zone, then to open water, its trees too enormous and too rooted to uproot themselves and follow their people inland. Standing at the water's edge during a very low tide, watching a black stump appear from the retreating sea is one of those rare moments when time collapses entirely. You are not looking at a relic. You are looking at a tree, still in the ground where it grew, outlasting everything that was built and named and lived around it, waiting every tide for someone to come back and remember what used to stand here. Fact 46. In the shallow banks of the Bahamas, off the coast of the small island of North Bimini, divers in 1968 found something that briefly felt, to some, like a dream come true, an underwater road. Hundreds of flat, rectangular stone blocks, each roughly the size of a large tabletop, lay arranged in two parallel lines on the sandy seafloor, curling gently for about half a mile before disappearing into deeper water. The blocks looked unmistakably like pavement, and in the charged atmosphere of late 1960s, spiritualism and the lingering echo of theories about lost Atlantis, a small number of enthusiastic researchers immediately declared this exactly what they had hoped to find. But careful geological study told a different story. Samples taken from the blocks themselves revealed they were beach rock, a type of naturally occurring limestone that forms when sand grains are cemented together just below the surface by minerals dissolved in groundwater, and that fractures, as it does in many locations worldwide, in large, roughly rectangular slabs along natural joint lines in the rock. Similar formations appear naturally on coastlines across the Caribbean. The beach itself is what went underwater as sea levels rose after the last glacial period. What the divers found was real, was genuinely unusual in scale and regularity, and was absolutely worth looking at carefully. It was simply not built by human hands. Nature, it turns out, is sometimes a better pavement layer than any civilization, and the story we build around a shape can outrun the shape itself by years before the real answer catches up. Fact 47. In the Gulf of Khambhat, off the northwestern coast of India, scientists conducting a routine sonar survey of the seafloor in 2001 detected something they did not expect: regular geometric anomalies, grid-like patterns, across an area of roughly 9 square miles on the ocean floor, at a depth of around 40 meters. Dredging operations in the area later brought up what were reported as ancient artifacts, wood fragments, pottery, and small stone tools, prompting the announcement of a potentially massive, pre-Harappan underwater city that would, if genuine, push the known age of Indian civilization back by many thousands of years. The story spread very quickly, and the scrutiny followed just as quickly. Independent scientists who reviewed the evidence pointed out that the geometric sonar patterns could as easily reflect natural geological formations common in river delta regions, and that the recovered wood fragments, carbon dated to roughly 9,500 years ago, showed no direct link to the geometric anomalies, leaving the connection between the age of the wood and the supposed architecture entirely unproven. What the Gulf of Khambhat story reveals, more than any lost city, is the archaeology of hope itself. How strongly we want the past to hold more lost chapters than it actually does, and how carefully that desire needs to be held in check by evidence, by doubt, by the patient, unglamorous work of asking the simplest possible question about every exciting discovery: what else could this be? Fact 48. At the bottom of Lake Titicaca, which straddles the high-altitude border between Bolivia and Peru at over 12,000 feet above sea level, a team of Franco-Bolivian divers in 2000 found something ancient beneath the cold, thin-aired water. A stone terrace, roughly 200 meters long, stretching across the lake floor, lined with paved pathways, small walls, and at one end, what appeared to be a partially intact stone building, dating the finds to a culture that preceded the Tiwanaku civilization by perhaps 1,500 years. Alongside the structure, they found offerings, gold objects, shells from the distant Pacific coast, pottery, and the ruins of what may once have been a small ceremonial complex dedicated to whatever this high-altitude inland sea meant to the people who lived in its shadow. Lake Titicaca holds an extraordinary place in the religious geography of the Inca world. According to Inca legend, it was here that Inti, the sun god, sent his children down to begin human civilization, the island sacred enough to have been chosen as the first foothold of the divine. Excavations on the island of the sun, in the same lake, have confirmed layers of ritual offerings reaching back across many centuries. To find that the lake floor itself carries the bones of an earlier civilization's devotion suggests something quiet and persistent about this high, cold, brilliant expanse of water. Long before the Inca called it sacred, someone was already giving it gifts, already lowering precious objects through the cold darkness toward a bottom they could never see. Fact 49. When geologists began investigating the sediment layers laid down on the floors of the Black Sea, they expected to find the ordinary geological record of an enclosed saltwater lake, slowly transformed by the inflow of the Mediterranean after the last ice age. What they found instead, at the boundary layer between freshwater and saltwater sediments, was a continuous, well-preserved ancient shoreline, complete with beaches, stream channels, and tidal features, stretching for hundreds of miles along what is now the bottom of the Black Sea, dated to roughly 7,500 years ago, when a catastrophic inflow of saltwater from what is today the Bosphorus Strait poured inland in one of the largest flood events in the geological record of the region. Some researchers, most notably oceanographers William Ryan and Walter Pittman, proposed that this event may be the origin of the flood mythology found in cultures across the ancient Near East, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Hebrew story of Noah, transmitted across millennia of oral tradition from the descendants of people who watched their coastline disappear under rising water. Later surveys of the Black Sea floor have confirmed human habitation along that ancient shoreline, stone tools, structures, even what appears to be a stone track or road that descends from the ancient beach down into deeper water. Whether these communities were large enough and their displacement traumatic enough to generate the flood stories carried by so many cultures across so many subsequent millennia remains, quietly and beautifully, an open question. Fact 50. In the spring of 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers working off the island of Antikythera were driven by a storm to shelter in an anchorage they knew, and one of them dove down to check the seafloor and found himself looking at the arm of a bronze horse protruding from a pile of dark rocks at about 55 meters depth. What the divers had stumbled into was one of the richest ancient shipwrecks ever recovered, a Roman-era cargo vessel dating to roughly 60 or 80 years before our era, carrying an extraordinary consignment of luxury goods, bronze and marble statues, glassware, silver coins, fine pottery, and somewhere near the stern, the corroded bronze mechanism that now bears the shipwreck's name. The Antikythera mechanism came up in fragments, looking only like lumps of green corrosion, and sat unrecognized in a museum for years before the shapes inside it began to reveal themselves under X-ray. We already spent time with the mechanism itself earlier tonight, but the ship that carried it has its own quiet mystery. Who were its passengers? Its cargo matches no single known purpose, no single obvious trading destination, too many different high-value objects from too many different sources. Some researchers believe it was carrying loot, artworks and luxury goods seized by Roman forces from conquered Greek territories, destined perhaps for a wealthy Roman villa or a triumphal celebration in Italy itself. If so, it sank carrying things that had already survived wars, conquests, and centuries of storage, only to come to rest on a seafloor where they would wait 2,000 years more, patient as only lost things can be, until a group of men sheltering from a storm dove down to check the rocks and accidentally changed what we know about the ancient world. We have spent this part of the night sinking, gently and slowly, through different kinds of water, through Mediterranean bays and Pacific trenches, through the silt of Egyptian harbors and the silt of high-altitude lakes. Each sunken city is not just a ruin, it is a before and after, a record of how completely a living world can be rearranged in a single afternoon by the quiet, inevitable movement of the earth itself. Let us surface now, slowly, and step onto dry land again, into a different kind of mystery, the civilizations that did not sink beneath the waves, but simply, one season, one decade, one slow generation at a time, vanished from history's memory entirely. Fact 51. In the mountains of central Turkey, for most of the 19th century, there was a persistent, uneasy gap in the known history of the ancient Near East, a powerful empire that the Bible mentioned 17 times, that Egyptian pharaohs described as one of their most formidable enemies, but that no physical evidence had ever confirmed. The Hittites, many scholars concluded, must simply be a biblical exaggeration. Then, in 1834, a French traveler stumbled across strange stone inscriptions in a ruined city near the modern Turkish town of Bogazkoy, carved in an unknown script on walls too extensive to be anything small. The site was large enough that excavations beginning in 1906 eventually revealed its true identity. Hattusa, the capital of an empire that had ruled much of ancient Turkey and northern Syria for nearly 500 years, had fought the Egyptian Empire to a standstill at the Battle of Kadesh, the oldest known battle for which detailed accounts survive from both sides, and had then, sometime around 1200 years before our era, been abandoned so completely and so swiftly that food jars were found still on the shelves, burnt grain still on the ground. What happened to end the Hittite Empire so quickly, so thoroughly, and so finally remains genuinely unresolved. The same collapse that destroyed them seems to have hit the entire Eastern Mediterranean at the same moment, a mystery archaeologists call the Bronze Age collapse, which we will return to shortly. What is gently remarkable about the Hittites is simply how thoroughly the world forgot they had ever existed, not for a generation, not for a century, but for 3,000 years, until a traveler happened to notice the words carved into a stone wall that nobody had bothered to read. Fact 52. In southwestern Spain, along the fertile delta of the Guadalquivir River, ancient Greek and Phoenician traders wrote of a wealthy, sophisticated kingdom they called Tartessos, a civilization so rich it was said to export vast quantities of silver, copper, and tin to the Mediterranean world, and so well organized that its ruler, a king named Arganthonios, reportedly lived to more than 150 years old. And then, sometime around 550 years before our era, Tartessos simply ceased to appear in any records. Its cities, if they left cities, have never been conclusively found. Its language, if it had one beyond the fragmentary inscriptions already recovered, has never been read. It dissolved so completely from the historical record that for centuries it was considered purely legendary, perhaps a garbled ancient memory of Atlantis itself. Recent Spanish archaeological work in the marshlands of the Doñana National Park has produced intriguing, if still tentative, evidence of large-scale buried structures in areas that would have been the Guadalquivir Delta in antiquity, possible remnants of what may be settlements connected to the Tartessian cultural sphere. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar suggest circular, enclosed structures of the right period buried beneath the marsh sediment. But no inscription, no written name, no artifact clearly labeled Tartessos has surfaced to confirm what everyone hopes they have found. If it is there, it has been waiting patiently under Spanish wetlands for 2,500 years for someone with the right instruments to finally look in the right direction. Fact 53. The Bronze Age was not ended by one empire, one drought, or one catastrophe. In roughly the space of 50 years, spanning from around 1200 to 1150 years before our era, nearly every major civilization in the eastern Mediterranean simultaneously collapsed, some of them completely, leaving behind only ruins and a few fragmentary records of chaos. The Mycenaean Greeks disappeared, the Hittites vanished, the kingdom of Ugarit, one of the ancient world's great trading cities, was destroyed and never rebuilt. The Egyptian New Kingdom survived, but only barely, shrunken and traumatized. Cyprus went dark. The palace economies of the Levantine coast shattered. Complex, interconnected trade networks that had functioned for centuries ceased, almost overnight, in archaeological terms. Who or what caused this remains genuinely, fiercely debated among scholars today. The contenders include the Sea Peoples, a coalition of unknown maritime raiders described in Egyptian inscriptions who attacked coastlines across the region. Climate collapse, confirmed by sediment cores showing a sharp multi-decadal drought precisely at this period. Internal revolts as palace redistribution economies failed under resource stress. Earthquakes recorded at several key sites. Disease carried along the very trade networks that were now collapsing. What most modern researchers now agree on is that no single cause is large enough to explain the simultaneous fall of so many different, independently organized societies across such a wide geography. It appears instead to have been what one scholar memorably called a perfect storm, half a dozen stresses, each manageable alone, all arriving together, interlocking into a collapse that no single adaptation strategy could stop. It is, quietly, one of the most important and most sobering lessons the ancient world ever left us. Fact 54. In the southwestern corner of modern China, in the Sichuan Basin, farmers digging an irrigation ditch in 1929 pulled up a collection of extraordinarily beautiful jade and stone objects, and by doing so, accidentally announced the existence of a civilization nobody in the world had known was there. Sanxingdui, as archaeologists named the site after the location of the first finds, turned out to be a walled Bronze Age city, contemporary with the Shang dynasty, but producing art so unlike anything from the Shang world or from any other known culture that its discovery has generated decades of scholarly debate about exactly where these people came from and where they went. The bronzes of Sanxingdui are the strangest. Enormous standing figures with bodies that taper into narrow poles, tree-like structures hung with fruit and birds, and above all, masks, dozens of them, with jutting razor-sharp noses, ears the size of dinner plates, and eyes that bulge dramatically outward from the face on tubular stalks, designed deliberately to look like something beyond a human face, something between a person and a god, and a creature the world had not invented a name for yet. 2 pits discovered in the 1980s contained these objects smashed and burned and deliberately buried, possibly in a single ritual event. 4 more pits found between 2019 and 2022 confirmed the scale was even larger than anyone had guessed. Who these people were, what language they spoke, why they ended, and where their descendants went remains almost entirely unknown. They left no writing, only bronze eyes watching from the dark, still trying to tell us something nobody has yet managed to hear. Fact 55. For nearly 2,000 years, the vast urban system of the Indus Valley civilization, with its straight gridded streets, its standardized brick sizes, its sophisticated drainage systems, its shared artistic styles, spread across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, thrived, grew, and then, somewhere between 1900 and 1700 years before our era, very gradually stopped. Cities were abandoned. Population shifted southward and eastward. Urban infrastructure was no longer maintained or replaced. The shared material culture that had unified thousands of square miles simply dissolved into smaller, more regional patterns, losing its coherence without any evidence of dramatic conquest, mass violence, or sudden external shock. The leading current explanation comes from climate science rather than military history. Monsoon patterns shifted during this period, weakening the seasonal rains that had sustained the large-scale grain agriculture needed to feed dense urban populations. The Great Saraswati River, whose annual flooding had supported some of the civilization's richest cities, appears to have dried up at around this same time. What is genuinely moving about the Indus Valley decline is its apparent quietness. No one seems to have fought to save the cities. The population did not stay and starve. People moved, adapted, carried their knowledge and their crafts elsewhere, and found new ways to live in a changing landscape. It was not a collapse so much as a dispersal, an entire civilization choosing, generation by generation, to become something different rather than cling to a form the land could no longer support. Fact 56. On the high Puna grasslands above northern Peru, sheltered in mountaintop fortresses with stone walls built so tightly that a knife could not pass between the blocks, lived a people who called themselves the Chachapoya, whom the Inca, centuries later, would name the Cloud Warriors. They were not a single city or a single kingdom, but a loose confederation of distinct communities spread across some of the most dramatically rugged terrain in the Andes, building their towns and their cemeteries on sheer cliff faces accessible only by ropes, placing their sarcophagi in painted forms shaped like human figures into crevices hundreds of feet above the forest floor, overlooking valleys they had farmed for centuries. When the Inca conquered them in the late 1500s, the Chachapoya resisted fiercely, allied with Spanish invaders against their old conquerors when the opportunity arose, and then, under the combined weight of conquest and the catastrophic epidemic diseases arriving from Europe, declined so rapidly and so thoroughly that within a century of Spanish contact, most of their villages were empty, their cliff cemeteries sealed, their oral traditions fragmenting. What their sarcophagi show, to anyone who finds their way up to the cliff ledges where they rest, is extraordinarily moving. A person-shaped figure looking outward from the cliff face, arms crossed over its chest, eyes looking somewhere distant, standing guard over the valley below for 500 years after anyone who knew their name was gone. Patient and painted and still watching. Fact 57. In the year around 900 of our era, in the fertile river confluence where the Missouri and Mississippi rivers meet near what is today East St. Louis, Illinois, someone made a decision to build a city. Not a village, not a seasonal encampment, but a genuine metropolitan area, eventually spreading across 6 square miles and supporting a population that may have reached 20,000 or more at its height around the year 1100, making it larger than contemporary London. Its people raised enormous flat-topped earthen pyramids, the largest of which, Monk's Mound, covers more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza, reaching 100 feet into the Illinois sky, using nothing but packed earth moved basket by basket over generations. They built wooden sun circles, laid out in the same relationship to the horizon as Stonehenge to its own surrounding landscape. Their artists carved human figures in red and cream shell, buried with individuals of such obvious high status that archaeologists gave one the informal name beaded burial, lying on a cloak made entirely from 20,000 drilled marine shell beads brought from 1,000 miles away. And then, around 1250 to 1350, Cahokia declined. Its population dispersed. The mounds went untended. Within a few centuries, European contact arrived, found no memory of the city, and the knowledge of what had been here had gone so completely from the people of the region that the mounds were initially attributed to a legendary lost race rather than to the ancestors of the very nations living nearby. That erasure of recent memory is, in its own quiet way, one of the most unsettling mysteries in North American history. Fact 58. At nearly 13,000 feet in the Bolivian Andes, at the very southern end of Lake Titicaca, the city of Tiwanaku once stood as the spiritual and administrative capital of a civilization that had spread its influence across much of the central Andes for several centuries. Its builders carved an enormous stone gateway called the Gateway of the Sun from a single block of andesite, adorned with a central figure radiating staff and sun imagery that would echo through Andean iconography for centuries after Tiwanaku itself was gone. They constructed raised field agricultural systems so sophisticated that modern agricultural projects have revived them to help Bolivian farmers grow crops on land that had been unproductive for 600 years. And then, around the year 1000 of our era, the rain stopped. Paleoclimate records drawn from ice cores and lake sediment samples show a prolonged and severe drought beginning at precisely the period when Tiwanaku shows signs of collapse, its outlying agricultural colonies failing first, then its urban core contracting, then the city itself emptying over what appears to be roughly a century of gradual abandonment. The Gateway of the Sun still stands at the site today, facing the sunrise with the same carved urgency it carried 1,000 years ago, its inscription, whatever it once announced, still unread, because the civilization that cut those words into the stone did not survive long enough to leave anyone who could remember what they meant. Fact 59. In the 1950s, an American zoologist named Charles Heiser, surveying the coastline of central Mexico, noticed a series of enormous heads emerging from the jungle undergrowth, each one weighing between 6 and 50 tons, each one carved from single boulders of basalt, each one displaying a distinct, helmet-wearing face with broad, flat features unlike anything in other Mesoamerican artistic traditions. By 1976, 17 of these colossal heads had been found, along with altars, thrones, and smaller figurines, all concentrated along a narrow strip of Gulf Coast lowland in Veracruz, where a civilization now called the Olmec had flourished between about 1500 and 400 years before our era. The Olmec are now understood to have been the first major complex society in Mesoamerica, the cultural forerunner of the Maya and Aztec worlds that came after. What is genuinely strange is how much of their inner life remains closed to us. The Olmec had no known writing system and no direct descendants who can be traced with certainty to their heartland cities. The colossal heads, clearly portraits of rulers or important individuals, each with its own distinct face and expression, represent some of the oldest monumental portraiture in the Americas. People important enough to be carved in stone, so heavy and permanent it would outlast everything else they built. And yet we cannot read a single name, not one. We call the heads 1 through 17 and give them numbers instead of names, because the names are gone, carried off into the same silence that eventually swallowed the rest of what these people knew about themselves. Fact 60. Let us pause here at the edge of Part 5's closing moment and simply sit with the weight of what we have been counting together. Civilizations do not only end in fire and conquest, some end in drought, quietly, over 3 generations. Some end in disease, a microbe arriving from a continent they did not know existed. Some end in a cultural dispersal so gradual that no single person would have called it ending, only changing, only moving, only becoming something new while letting the old forms go. The Bronze Age collapse, the Indus Valley dispersal, the slow emptying of Cahokia, the abandonment of Tiwanaku, none of these ended with a dramatic last stand at a burning city gate. Most of them ended exactly the way most things end, not with a catastrophe so obvious it could be named, but with a series of small decisions made by ordinary people under increasing pressure to leave, to adapt, to carry what mattered, and put down what could no longer be carried. That is not a diminishment of the mystery. If anything, it makes it larger, because it means the questions we are really asking tonight are not just about the past. Let us carry that gently forward now, into the quieter darkness of the graves. Fact 61. In a raised peat bog in Jutland, Denmark, in the spring of 1950, two workers cutting peat for fuel sliced through what they initially feared was a recent murder victim. The body they uncovered was extraordinarily well preserved, the skin still supple, the face still wearing an expression of calm, the short stubble on his chin still visible after more than 2,000 years in the oxygen-poor, acidic darkness of the bog. He became known as the Tolland Man, and he remains one of the most perfectly preserved Iron Age bodies ever found. His face, so peacefully human that the workers who found him were genuinely disturbed, certain he had died very recently. Laboratory analysis told a different story. He had lived and died around 375 years before our era, consuming a simple last meal of porridge made from barley and seeds, and had then been carefully strangled with a braided leather noose, still looped around his neck, and placed, with great deliberateness, into the bog in what appears to have been a ritual offering. The bog bodies of Northern Europe, several hundred found across Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and Britain, almost all show signs of violent death, paired with careful, respectful placement, stabbed and thrown in, strangled and laid face down with stones to hold them under. Some show signs of multiple causes of death simultaneously, as though different forms of killing were being combined into a single ritual act. The leading interpretation is sacrifice, given to watery, liminal places that Iron Age people seem to have regarded as the boundary between the human world and whatever lay beneath it. But sacrifice for what? To appease something angry, to send a messenger across, to honor someone important in a dark way. The bogs, having kept their secrets for 2,000 years, show no sign of breaking their silence now. Fact 62. In 2010, workers digging a water pipe near the ancient Chinese capital of Xi'an accidentally cracked open a section of soil that no excavation tool had touched in over 2,000 years, and found themselves looking at something that had been waiting patiently underground since the death of the first emperor of a unified China. But this was not, in the end, the famous terracotta army itself. It was something more unexpected, a fourth pit, lying between the three main sections of the terracotta complex, empty, its floor prepared, its walls sealed, but never filled with soldiers. Archaeologists now believe Emperor Qin Shi Huang died before his burial complex was complete, and that this fourth pit was simply left empty when the work suddenly stopped. That empty pit may be the most suggestive part of the whole complex. It asks, quietly, how much more was planned? If one of the largest individual artistic and engineering undertakings in human history was still unfinished at the time of its commissioner's death, what else was meant to go into the ground that never arrived? And the inner burial mound itself, the sealed core around which all 8,000 soldiers stand guard, has never been opened. Ancient texts describe rivers of flowing mercury inside it, representing China's rivers and seas. Modern surveys have detected high levels of mercury in the soil precisely around the sealed mound, suggesting the ancient description may, for once, be literally accurate. Archaeologists have so far declined to open it, partly out of preservation concern, partly because the technology to properly excavate and conserve what might be inside does not quite exist yet. The emperor's tomb itself waits, still intact, still sealed, still surrounded by its terracotta army, patient as he always apparently was. Fact 63. On a cold morning in 1939, archaeologist Basil Brown was excavating a series of grassy mounds at Sutton Hoo in Suffolk, England, when the dark soil yielded iron ship rivets in a long, unmistakable line, the ghost of a wooden vessel 89 feet long that had rotted away completely but left its iron bones behind. Inside what had been the ship's central burial chamber, the soil preserved in the shape of objects that had long since decayed, but enough physical evidence survived to identify one of the richest burials ever found in the British Isles. Helmet, sword, shield, drinking horns, a massive silver dish from Byzantium, gold shoulder clasps of extraordinary workmanship with cloisonné garnets cut so thin they were transparent, a purse with 40 gold coins representing 40 different Frankish mints, and a scepter topped with a bronze stag. No body survived the acidic Suffolk soil. No name was written anywhere in the burial goods, and so the identity of the person for whom this ship was dragged from the river, filled with treasure, and buried under a mound overlooking a tidal estuary remains, precisely and permanently unknown. Most archaeologists today believe this is the burial of a great Anglo-Saxon king, possibly Raedwald of East Anglia, who died around the year 625 and was remembered by the Venerable Bede as one of the most powerful rulers of his era. But Bede never described a ship burial this extraordinary for Raedwald, and archaeology has no definitive way to attach a name to bones that are no longer there. The helmet stares from its museum case with its distinctive iron face mask, patient and kingly and permanently, beautifully unnamed. Fact 64. Beneath the flat plains of southern Ukraine and Russia, scattered across the steppe in their thousands, the burial mounds called kurgans rise from the grass like the slow exhalations of a sleeping earth, containing the graves of the Scythians and their predecessors, a nomadic culture that dominated the Eurasian steppe from roughly the 9th to the 3rd centuries before our era. The Scythians left no written records of their own. Everything recorded about them was written by their neighbors, by the Greeks who traded with them, by the Persians who feared them, by the Assyrians who encountered them on campaign. These outside accounts are partial, interested, and sometimes astonishing, describing a people who drank from the skulls of enemies, who wore scale armor made of layered horse hooves, who apparently used cannabis in closed steam bath rituals. Whether all of this is accurate, exaggerated, or invented by nervous neighbors with something to prove remains entirely unknown. What the kurgans themselves confirm is the treasure, gold, in quantities that still catch the breath, horses buried with their riders in full harness, occasionally servants apparently accompanying their masters into death, textiles too fine for the cold steppe climate, bronze cauldrons, and in some tombs, what appear to be the burials of women interred with the same weapons, armor, and horse sacrifices as the male warriors, possibly the real origin behind Greek stories about a tribe of warrior women called the Amazons. They left behind gold and silence, in roughly equal measure, and somehow the gold is easier to look at than the silence. Fact 65. Beneath the volcanic ash that preserved Pompeii in its final afternoon, beneath the freezing ice that preserved Ötzi on his alpine pass, Beneath the bog that preserved Tollund Man in his last posture lies a simpler, quieter archaeological mystery that plays out in the ordinary graves of ordinary people. The question of why some things were placed beside the dead and not others. In the small graves of Roman children, archaeologists have found tiny clay oil lamps, coins placed in the mouth, small cloth dolls whose fabric has rotted away, leaving only their tiny clay faces, small wooden toys pressed into small cold hands. In the graves of Celtic warriors, swords were bent deliberately out of shape before burial, not to preserve them, but precisely to destroy them, to remove them from the living world as irrevocably as their owner had been removed. In medieval Scandinavian graves, ships were burned with their occupants, the flames bright enough to be seen from remarkable distances, a final departure visible to everyone who remained. In ancient Egyptian child burials, miniature versions of adult objects, a tiny jar, a tiny comb, a tiny boat, were placed as though the child's afterlife would simply be a smaller scale version of the life they had not yet finished growing into. None of this is incomprehensible. Grief is grief, and has always been grief. What is quietly moving is how consistently, across every culture and every era, human beings have responded to the same impossible moment in the same way, by putting something into the ground beside the one they could not keep. The specific objects change, the impulse never does. Fact 66. Below the streets of modern Valletta, Malta, drilled into the soft golden limestone that the entire island is built from, lies one of the oldest intact underground ritual complexes ever found, built by people who lived on Malta between 3,800 and 2,500 years before our era. The Hal Saflieni Hypogeum, as it is known, is a labyrinth of interconnected chambers, 3 levels deep, carved over several centuries into the rock, its walls curving smoothly in architectural forms that echo the above-ground temples built by the same hands, corbelled ceilings, deeply carved niches, doorways shaped like the entrance to a megalithic tomb. The remains of approximately 7,000 individuals were found inside it during excavation, spread across the chambers in what appears to be a long-term communal ossuary, bones gathered and regathered over generations, the dead of many centuries brought together in the dark. And in one particularly striking chamber, a small painted surface near the ceiling carries one of the only examples of red ochre painting found in the Maltese temple complex: spirals, honeycomb shapes, and what may be the outline of an animal, faint and fragile and never fully interpreted. There is a room inside the hypogeum that researchers call the Oracle Room, a rectangular chamber in which a male voice speaking in the lower register creates a remarkable resonance, a deep, buzzing vibration that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. Whether this was deliberate, an acoustic effect built into the chamber by its Neolithic builders, or entirely coincidental, remains genuinely unknown. But it is precisely the kind of room in which a priest, speaking in the right pitch in the right dark, could have convinced an entire community that the voice of something vast and ancient was answering them from inside the stone. Fact 67. In the years between 1967 and 1993, archaeologist James Millart and his successors excavated the great Neolithic town of Çatalhöyük in central Turkey, one of the largest and best preserved early urban settlements ever found, and encountered there a burial practice unlike anything they had expected. The people of Çatalhöyük, living between 7,500 and 5,500 years before our era, buried their dead directly beneath the floors of the houses where the living slept and worked, not in a cemetery, not in a dedicated ritual space, directly under the family's sleeping platform, sometimes under the hearth, in the very domestic center of daily life. Skeletal analysis has shown that some of these burials were not immediate. Bodies were sometimes allowed to partially decompose elsewhere and then disarticulated, specific bones removed and kept circulating above ground as portable objects in the living house before eventually being interred below. Skulls were sometimes later removed from graves and kept, painted, handled, set into walls. The relationship between the living and their dead at Çatalhöyük was not separation, it was continuation. The ancestors remained literally underfoot, present in the soil of the room where dinner was made, and children played, and arguments were had, and the ordinary daily business of living unfolded above them. We tend to arrange our dead at a respectful distance from our living. Çatalhöyük suggests this was not a universal human instinct at all, simply a preference that took time to develop, and that for thousands of years before it became standard, people found other, closer, more intimate ways to stay in contact with everyone they had ever loved. Fact 68. In 1772, in a limestone cave called Paviland on the coast of the Gower Peninsula in Wales, a geologist named William Buckland discovered a burial he described as a woman, concluding this because of the ivory jewelry, shell ornaments, and red ochre staining surrounding the bones. He named his discovery the Red Lady of Paviland and confidently assigned her a Roman date. He was wrong on both counts. Modern analysis confirmed the bones belonged to a young man, probably in his late 20s, buried around 33,000 years ago during the Upper Paleolithic, making this the oldest known intentional burial of a modern human in Britain, performed at a time when southern England was not an island but part of a vast cold steppe where woolly mammoth and woolly rhinoceros roamed. The red ochre, ground from iron-rich stone and spread deliberately over the body, is one of the oldest consistently recurring burial practices in human archaeology, found across cultures from Africa to Asia, across tens of thousands of years. Something about the vivid red color appears again and again whenever people began deliberately honoring their dead. Was it meant to mimic blood, representing the renewal of life? Was it simply beautiful, a way of making the grave a beautiful thing? Was it protective, a barrier between the dead and whatever waited on the other side of death? We do not know, and may never know. What we do know is this. 33,000 years ago, on a cliff, above a cold sea that was not yet an island, a group of people paused what they were doing, gathered red stone and ground it fine, and covered a young man in its color before placing him in the dark, with ivory ornaments and shells from the shore, as carefully as anyone has ever buried anyone since. Fact 69. In 1953, road workers widening a road in Mont-la-Soie, France, encountered a buried bronze vessel so enormous that it immediately stopped work and generated headlines around the world. The Vix crater, as it came to be known after the nearby village, is the largest surviving bronze vessel from the ancient world, 1.6 meters tall and weighing over 400 kilograms, its handles decorated with Gorgon faces, and its neck ringed with a frieze of warriors in chariots. It was found inside the grave of a woman who died around 525 years before our era, identified as Celtic on the basis of the surrounding culture's material remains, buried with a spectacular gold torque around her neck and her burial wagon disassembled beside her. She is now referred to simply as the Lady of Vix or the Princess of Vix, and her identity, her name, her specific role in Celtic society remains entirely unknown. The crater itself was almost certainly not made locally. Its style suggests a Greek workshop, possibly in the Greek colony at Massalia, modern Marseille, 700 kilometers to the south. How it traveled to a hilltop in northern Burgundy and why it was entrusted to this particular woman's burial rather than retained as a communal object speaks to a world of long-distance prestige exchange that left almost no other documentary trace. She has been sleeping beneath Burgundy for 2,500 years, wearing her gold, watched over by the most elaborate vessel ever offered to one person's grave, and we do not even know what her people called her. Fact 70. Let us close this part of the night, this long, quiet walking among the dead, with a burial found not in a hole, not in a mound, not in a ship, but in a cave, on a small island in the Philippines, in January of 2022. In Ile Cave on the island of Palawan, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a child, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, wrapped, it appears, in a burial shroud of woven plant material that had left its impression in the sediment, and placed with extraordinary care on the cave floor roughly 2,200 years ago. What made this discovery extraordinary was not the burial itself, but what was found above and around it, the physical arrangement suggesting that the child had been set in a specific position, face carefully oriented toward the cave entrance and the light, the body placed as though being laid down to sleep, not abandoned, not discarded, but gently, deliberately aligned with the opening of the world outside. Archaeologists are careful about the language they use for things like this. They say the child was placed in a specific orientation. They say the position suggests deliberate care. What they cannot say, and what any person reading the evidence feels anyway, quietly, through whatever professional language sits over it, is that someone, 2,200 years ago, set a very small child down very carefully with their face toward the light, and then did not come back for them, and the cave kept them safe all this time, patient and warm and dark. We have spent this section of the night moving through tombs and bogs and limestone caves and ship-shaped holes in the Suffolk earth. Every grave we visited was, at its center, an attempt, made by living hands, to address an impossible fact, that someone was gone. Tonight, that impulse is still recognizable in every one of us. It has not changed in 33,000 years. Let us rest in that recognition for a moment before we move on into something stranger still, the rituals no modern eye has yet been able to fully read. Fact 71. On a hilltop above the Rhine Valley in central Germany, Sometime around 1600 years before our era, someone buried a remarkable object in the earth, where it would wait, undisturbed, for 3,400 years. The Nebra sky disk, found by treasure hunters in 1999 and later acquired for scholarship after a careful police operation involving a sting in a Swiss hotel room, is a circular bronze plate about the size of a large dinner plate, its dark green patina inlaid with gold leaf shapes arranged in a pattern that took researchers some time to understand fully. A full crescent, a full circle, the sun or full moon, 32 small dots scattered across its face, and, in its most significant feature, a group of 7 dots clustered together in the exact configuration of the Pleiades star cluster as it would have appeared to Bronze Age eyes. At some point after the disk was first made, additional gold arcs were added to its edges, and those arcs align, when held at the horizon, with the precise angle of sunrise and sunset at the latitude of Nebra during the solstices, turning the object into a functioning portable calendar capable of coordinating farming seasons and solar alignments for anyone who understood how to use it. A final addition, a boat-shaped arc at the bottom, may represent the solar bark of Bronze Age religion, carrying the sun through the underworld during the night. This is the oldest known representation of astronomical knowledge in the form of a material object, older than the Egyptian star clocks, older than Stonehenge in its final form, made by people who left no writing, only this one extraordinary bronze record of exactly how carefully they were watching the sky above them and trying to hold it still in the palm of their hand. Fact 72. In the Peruvian coastal desert north of Lima, a site called Huaca Prieta sits at the edge of the ocean where the Andes come down almost to the shore, and within its ancient layers, buried beneath trash deposits nearly 15 meters deep from thousands of years of occupation, archaeologists found something that quietly rewrote the known timeline of complex culture in the Americas. Huaca Prieta was occupied continuously from before 14,000 years ago until around 4,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest known sites of sustained human habitation in the Americas. And within its oldest layers, researchers found not the simple, expected tools and bones of migrating hunter-gatherers, but sophisticated woven textiles made on some form of loom, twisted fiber cordage, and most strikingly, evidence of deliberate cultivation, a variety of cultivated plants, including the ancestor of modern domesticated cotton, grown not for food, but specifically for its fiber. The people of Huaca Prieta were growing cotton to weave cloth at a time when, according to the models that dominated American archaeology for most of the 20th century, humans had only recently arrived in the continent at all. Their presence there, their sophistication, their sustained choice to stay in one place and improve it across thousands of years, fundamentally changes the story of how and when complex human culture developed in the Americas. They were not passing through, they were home. Fact 73. In the highlands of central Laos, across a plateau stretching for miles through the mountain landscape, thousands of massive stone jars sit scattered across the hillsides, carved from solid sandstone, limestone, and granite boulders, each one large enough to hide a sleeping person inside. The Plain of Jars is one of the most striking and least understood archaeological landscapes in Southeast Asia. The Jars, roughly 500 years old at their youngest and potentially several thousand at their oldest, were always assumed to be funerary vessels, urns for cremated remains, but evidence to confirm this remained frustratingly thin for decades. Recent excavations, finally made possible after decades of delay caused by unexploded ordnance dropped during the Vietnam War era, have finally produced direct evidence of burial practices in the surrounding soil. Burned bone fragments, glass beads, ceramic burial goods, and small mini jars placed near the large ones, suggesting the jars functioned as part of a larger funerary landscape, possibly as the site of secondary burial, where the dead were placed temporarily until after decomposition, before the remains were collected and interred more permanently. What still remains entirely unclear is the culture that built them, the people who looked at a mountainside and decided that the right response was to carve hundreds of enormous stone containers into it over many generations. They left no writing, no temple complex, nothing but the jars themselves, sitting in the mountain grass with the patient dignity of objects that have been asked a question they cannot quite figure out how to answer. Fact 74. In the Swiss Lake District, during the dry summers of the late 18th century, receding lake levels began to reveal the buried remains of what archaeologists would come to understand as lake dwellings, entire villages built on wooden platforms extending over the water on thousands of driven wooden posts, constructed by Neolithic and Bronze Age communities between about 4,000 and 800 years before our era. The wooden preservation in these waterlogged sediments is extraordinary. Planks, posts, entire structural timbers survive, with their tool marks still crisp, the adze that shaped them so clearly recorded in the wood grain that researchers can identify the specific blade widths used and work backward to the tools themselves. Organic materials that would have vanished within a generation on dry land, fruit, seeds, leaves, woven fabric, rope, even food remains, have been protected here by water and sediment for 5,000 or 6,000 years. What these preserved villages show, quietly and in abundant detail, is the texture of ordinary ancient life, the bread that was baked using specific combinations of wild and cultivated grain, the fish that was eaten smoked or fresh from the lake, the wooden bowls in which it was served, the wooden combs drawn through someone's hair on an ordinary morning, the leather shoes made with a specific technique that tells us exactly where in the tanning process the ancient craftsperson departed from the method their neighbor was using. The mystery of these lake villages is not a dramatic one. It is the mystery of overwhelming specificity, of knowing so much about how these people lived that the one thing we still cannot recover, what any individual among them thought, felt, or said on any particular evening, becomes not less felt, but more so, because we can see so precisely the world in which they thought, felt, and said it. Fact 75. In the limestone mountains of eastern Spain, in a cave called the Cueva de los Caballos, figures of running deer and leaping goats were painted in red and black across the cave walls sometime between 10,000 and 8,000 years before our era, drawn with a fluid confidence of line that still astonishes professional artists who study them today. What makes these particular paintings A little different from the better-known cave art of Altamira or Lascaux is the human figures scattered among the animals. Tiny human archers are shown mid-chase, legs bent in full sprint, arms drawn back in the moment before release, giving these images a quality of narrative, of storytelling, of action frozen at its most urgent point, that more closely resembles modern sequential illustration than anything we usually associate with the word prehistoric. These were not artists groping toward representation. They were artists already entirely at ease in it, already selecting which moment in a sequence to freeze, already understanding that a bent knee and a drawn bow could convey movement in still pigment on stone. Their sophistication in this regard exceeds many things produced thousands of years later, and when the last of these cave painters stopped working, no one in Europe painted like this again for thousands of years. The tradition simply ceased, and its loss is one of the genuine aesthetic tragedies hidden inside the vast sweep of human prehistory, a school of art so accomplished it is tempting to imagine there should have been a pupil somewhere who continued it, and instead there was only silence and the paintings, still perfect in the dark. Fact 76. No ancient ritual has generated more genuine scholarly debate in the last 30 years than the practice of deliberate skull deformation, in which the heads of infants were bound tightly with cloth or boards during the earliest months of life, gradually reshaping the growing skull into an elongated form that would persist for the entire person's adult life. This practice was widespread, astonishingly so, appearing in archaeological records from Peru to France, to Siberia to Eastern Africa, in cultures that had no obvious connection to each other and no known mechanism by which they could have shared the idea. Some researchers have tracked its spread as evidence of cultural contact between groups previously considered isolated. Others suggest it may represent a case of parallel cultural development, the same fundamental aesthetic emerging from the same basic human impulse toward bodily modification in separate places across separate millennia. The deliberate nature is beyond question. Infant skulls are pliable, the bones not yet fused, and sustained gentle pressure during the first 2 years of life permanently reshapes the cranium without harming the brain, which simply grows into whatever form the skull takes. The individuals who underwent this process in childhood lived entirely normal lives with no identified health impacts from the practice itself. What we do not know is what it meant. Status, beauty, group identity, a mark of belonging to a specific lineage, a visual representation of spiritual power or nearness to the divine. All of these have been proposed, and none has been conclusively demonstrated to apply across all the cultures that practiced it, because the people who decided that this was the right thing to do with a new baby's skull left no record of what they believed it signified. Fact 77. In 1991, on a high mountain pass between Austria and Italy, melting glacial ice released a man who had been preserved inside it for roughly 5,300 years. Ötzi, as the world quickly came to call him, was not a willing sacrifice or a careful ritual burial. He was a person who walked up a mountain one day around 3,300 years before our era and did not come back down alive. Analysis of his body has been exceptionally detailed. His last meals reconstructed from the pollen in his stomach contents, and actual food remains in his intestines: deer and ibex meat, einkorn wheat bread, various wild plant roots, eaten across several distinct meals in the days before his death. And then, finally, a copper-tipped arrow was found embedded in his shoulder from behind, piercing an artery and killing him within minutes. He had been shot in the back, almost certainly by someone who knew him, or at least followed him deliberately up that mountain for the purpose. The person who shot Ötzi almost certainly stood over the body for a moment before descending again alone. His valuables were not taken. His fine copper axe, extraordinarily rare for the period, remained beside him. Whatever the motive, it was not robbery. For 5,300 years, the glacier held that particular afternoon frozen in place until it released him, quietly, into the sunlight of the modern world, bringing with him the last unreported crime of the Chalcolithic age, still open, still technically unsolved, the perpetrator unavoidably beyond our reach. Fact 78. Around 30,000 years ago, in the limestone hills of what is now the Dordogne region of France, someone walked into a cave and marked the wall with their hand. They pressed their palm flat against the cold stone, took a mouthful of red ochre pigment mixed with water, and blew it hard through a short tube or around the back of their hand directly from their lips, leaving a perfect stenciled silhouette in the dark. The hand has been there for 30,000 years. The person who made it is not. Hand stencils appear in cave art sites from Argentina to Australia to Indonesia to Southern Africa, produced across a time span and a geography so enormous that no single cultural tradition can explain their presence. Some researchers have catalogued the proportions of surviving stencils against modern populations and proposed that a significant number appear to belong to women and children rather than the adult men, most 19th century narratives assigned to cave art. What the hand stencil says is the simplest possible thing a person can say. It says, "I was here, I was real. I pressed my living hand against this surface and left a mark, and now you are here, and you can see exactly where my fingers ended and the cold stone began, separated from each other by an amount of time too large for any human mind to comfortably hold. And nevertheless, here we are, both present, both briefly in the same cave together." It is the most direct greeting in the archaeological record, and after 30,000 years, it still lands exactly as intended. Fact 79. On a flat coastal plain just north of the Peruvian city of Trujillo, archaeologists excavating a site called Huanchaquito Las Llamas in 2011 found something that stopped everyone working there very still for a long time. The remains of 140 children, aged 5 to 14, buried in a single event, each one placed carefully on their back, with their sternum cut open and their heart apparently removed, the soil around them stained red with ochre, their small feet still bearing traces of dried mud from the local tidal flats, as though they had been walked there from somewhere nearby. Beside them, 200 unkilled llamas, similarly treated hearts, apparently removed in parallel. It is the largest known mass child sacrifice ever documented anywhere in the archaeological record. The site dates to around the year 1450, when the Chimu Empire that built and inhabited this city was itself coming under intense pressure from Inca expansion. Some researchers have proposed the sacrifice was made in response to a specific, catastrophic flood event, the kind of El Niño surge that in this region can destroy years of crops and reshaping of entire coastlines in a single season, a massive and desperate offering to whatever force controlled the sea and the rain. There is no comfortable place to stand while holding this fact. Nothing about it can be made comfortable, and perhaps it should not be. What it shows is the full range of what human beings have been capable of in the name of appeasing what they believed controlled their fate. The children walked there barefoot from the tidal flats. The evidence of mud on their feet is the most particular, most impossible detail in the entire site. Fact 80. Let us ease ourselves gently away from that darkness and close this part of our journey with something quieter. A ritual we do not understand, but that carries no horror in it, only a kind of gorgeous, unexplained geometry. In the high desert of Peru's Nazca Plateau, and in the Palpa region to its north, a series of lines scraped in the desert surface stretches across the brown rock, some of them perfectly straight for miles, some of them forming the edges of enormous geometric shapes, some of them spiraling into the shapes of a spider, a condor, a hummingbird, a monkey with a curled tail, each one so large that its full shape is only visible from the air, invisible on the ground to anyone simply walking beside it. The Nazca people made these between roughly 200 years before our era and 600 years after, scraping aside the darker desert varnish to reveal the lighter rock beneath, a technique requiring no heavy machinery, only patience and a very clear plan held in someone's head. The most recent and most broadly accepted research suggests the lines were ritual pathways, walked rather than viewed, ceremonial circuits connecting areas of spiritual significance, not messages to gods or aliens, but processional routes, the ancient equivalent of a pilgrimage road that happens from above to look like a beautiful drawing. But whether the Nazca people knew what the lines looked like from the air, whether that mattered to them at all, remains genuinely open. They may have built their beautiful shapes for feet rather than eyes. The sky view may simply be an unintended gift, left for a future world of flight that they could not have imagined, who would look down, centuries later, and see a hummingbird waiting patiently in the dust. Tonight, we have moved through sacrifices and handprints and hilltop jars and skull-shaped hills and all the ways human beings have tried in every era to make meaning visible in the material world. Let us drift now, in the last long arc of our journey, toward the oldest mysteries of all, the ones that sit at the very edge of what we know about ourselves. Fact 81. In the northwestern corner of Ireland, on a drumlin above a bend in the Boyne River, Newgrange stands, a passage tomb older than Stonehenge by 5 centuries, and older than the great Egyptian pyramids by several more, built sometime around 3,200 years before our era by people who left no name, no language, no record of themselves beyond the monument itself. It is a kidney-shaped mound of earth and stone, nearly 100 meters across at its widest, its outer retaining wall faced with brilliant white quartz, quarried from 60 miles away in the Wicklow Mountains and carried here by people using no wheeled vehicles and no large draft animals. Around its base, curbstones carved with spirals and diamond and lozenge shapes are arranged in a continuous circuit, some of the most elaborate Neolithic art ever made. The chamber at the center of the mound is accessed by a narrow 19-meter passage lined with standing stones, and at the very inner end of that passage, above the entrance doorway, is a feature called the roof box, a precisely angled slot in the stone that serves no structural purpose and has only one possible function. On the winter solstice, for approximately 17 minutes, the rising sun enters through that roof box and travels the full length of the passage to illuminate the central chamber with direct sunlight for the only time in the entire year. The alignment is so precise, so clearly intentional, that it must have been planned from the very beginning, built into the monument's design before the first stone was laid. 5,000 years ago, people stood in the dark of that chamber and watched the light come in. We still stand in the dark and watch it come in today, waiting our turn in a lottery for a small number of places inside the mound on those 3 or 4 mornings. The light arrives. It always arrives. Whatever was meant to happen in that moment, something still does. Fact 82. In the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, on a hillside near the town of Huara, a human figure was laid into the desert surface sometime between the years 1000 and 1500 of our era. Enormous, drawn by removing the pebbles of the desert pavement to reveal the lighter soil beneath. The Atacama Giant, as it is now known, stretches for over 119 meters, making it the largest known prehistoric anthropomorphic figure in the world, taller than any other human image left anywhere in the ancient landscape. Its body is surrounded by geometric lines, and atop its rectangular head sit what appear to be antennae or ray lines radiating outward, a visual language shared with other anthropomorphic geoglyphs in the region. What makes the Atacama Giant particularly interesting is not just its size, but the evidence that people continued to relate to it actively long after it was made. Lines have been added, modified, and partially obscured over time, suggesting the figure was not simply made and then left, but maintained, revised, and reinterpreted across generations, a living piece of the sacred landscape rather than a fixed statement. The desert that preserves it so perfectly is also what makes it invisible on the ground. You would walk across it without knowing. Only from the ridge above can you see it complete. It is possible, then, that the act of ascending to the viewpoint was itself part of the ritual. The climbing of the hill, the price of seeing the face of the giant clearly, the earth itself requiring something of you before it would reveal what it was holding. Fact 83. On a chalk hillside in Oxfordshire, England, carved into the turf so that the white chalk beneath shows through, lies a horse, or something that looks like a horse, 110 meters long, drawn in a style so abstract and so fluid that it has been compared more often to the Bronze Age art of Central Asia than to anything else in Britain. The Uffington White Horse was cut sometime between 1200 and 800 years before our era, which makes it the oldest chalk hill figure in Britain by a very large margin, and unlike the younger, more literal hill carvings made during the 17th and 18th centuries, it was made with a confidence in abstraction that places it in an entirely different artistic tradition. It was maintained, generation after generation of local people, for 3,000 years organized a communal scouring, pulling the encroaching turf away from the chalk to keep the figure bright and legible. This practice, recorded in documentary sources from medieval times, confirms that the figure was actively valued and actively preserved across a span of time almost impossible to comprehend as a continuous act of cultural memory. No one today knows what it was called. The name White Horse is medieval and practical. What its makers called it, in the language they spoke on this hillside 3,000 years ago, is lost. But the figure itself, they kept so carefully that it was still here and will still be here for as long as anyone continues to scrub away the grass. Fact 84. In the remote desert of eastern California, near the Colorado River, a group of large intaglio figures lie scratched into the desert floor, some of them more than 50 meters long, depicting human beings and animals in a style and at a scale almost impossible to appreciate from ground level. The blithe intaglios, as they are known, are thought to have been made by the ancestors of the Mojave and Quechan peoples somewhere between 500 and 2,000 years ago, though dating geoglyphs without organic material is exceptionally difficult, and more precise dating has so far proven elusive. What makes the blithe intaglios notable in the context of other geoglyphs is their relatively recent discovery in the context of European American record, first officially documented from the air in 1932, when a pilot flying above the desert saw the figures from his aircraft and photographed them. Local indigenous traditions connect the human figure to a specific cultural hero whose story is told in oral tradition across several Colorado River peoples, a connection that, if validated, would give these figures a named meaning, a cultural context, and a living interpretive lineage, something that most ancient geoglyphs elsewhere in the world entirely lack. It is a gentle reminder that for many ancient sites, the mystery is not universal. It is simply a mystery to those of us who arrived late and asked questions in the wrong language of the wrong people. The right people, in some cases, still know. Fact 85. In the year 2015, a survey of a previously unstudied area near Stonehenge, using ground-penetrating radar without disturbing a single grain of soil, detected the buried outlines of approximately 20 buried standing stones, arranged in a broad, incomplete arc about 3 kilometers from Stonehenge itself. The site, near a Neolithic mound called Durrington Walls, appears to have been a ceremonial complex that archaeologists now call the Superhenge, an arrangement of enormous stones roughly 3 meters tall and 1.5 meters wide that were pushed over and buried deliberately at some point before Durrington Walls itself was raised over them. Nothing is currently visible at the site from ground level. The entire monument exists only in data, as a ghostly shape revealed by instruments measuring slight variations in soil density. Researchers believe this buried monument may have been deliberately filled in as part of the same landscape reorganization that produced the henge structure above it, as though the people of that era were not only building sacred landscapes, but actively editing them, erasing earlier structures to build newer ones over their footprints, layering meaning on top of meaning across the same ground across many generations. The Stonehenge landscape, in other words, is not a monument. It is a conversation, conducted in stone, and Earth across more than 2,000 years by people who clearly knew what their predecessors had built and chose, sometimes to continue it, and sometimes to deliberately and respectfully bury it, and build something new on top of their work. Fact 86. In the Egyptian desert south of the ancient city of Luxor, carved into the limestone cliff face of the Valley of the Kings, a small chamber in a tomb that no one can now precisely date, contains a painting of the night sky, a circular map of the northern constellation groupings as they appeared from Egypt more than 3,000 years ago. The astronomical ceiling of Senenmut, named after the royal official whose tomb this is thought to be, shows star groupings labeled with their Egyptian names and connected by lines that describe the paths of planets and the positions of the decans, the 36 star groups used by ancient Egyptians to divide the night into intervals. Planets are shown as figures in boats, sailing across the sky on their courses. What makes this ceiling scientifically interesting, beyond its artistic achievement, is the accuracy of its astronomical data, detailed and correct enough to have allowed modern astronomers to use it as a check on their own understanding of precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that gradually shifts which stars appear where over thousands of years. These were not decorative choices. The star positions on this ceiling were observed, recorded, and reproduced with genuine care for accuracy, because in the Egyptian understanding of the afterlife, the deceased needed to navigate a sky that was the actual sky, a star map that actually worked if they were going to find their way through the night. The Egyptians painted the stars as protection. We look at the same stars with telescopes. The sky they mapped and the sky we study are the same sky. We are still, in a sense, working from the same chart. Fact 87. High on a mountainside in central Turkey, in the last years of the 1st century before our era, a local king who styled himself both a Persian and a Greek commissioned one of the most audacious self-monuments in ancient history, a colossal tomb sanctuary on the summit of Mount Nemrut, at nearly 2,300 meters, surrounded by enormous seated statues of gods, 5 meters tall, each god bearing his own name in Greek and Persian letters, carved into the back of the throne. And the king himself, Antiochus I of Commagene, placed himself in the center of this company of gods, seated equally among them, equal in size, equal in dignity, his own name carved with equal confidence. The head statues, tumbled from their bodies by centuries of earthquake and frost, now lie scattered across the hillside in a rough circle of enormous, calm stone faces, half buried in rubble, each face slightly different, some damaged, some intact, all sharing the same quality of unhurried stillness that comes from 2,000 years of watching mountain weather blow past. At sunrise and sunset, when the light is horizontal, these stone faces cast long shadows across each other, and for a brief period each day the mountain takes on an air of ceremony again, as though the gods have not entirely left, only gone quiet, waiting on a summit most visitors do not make the climb to reach until they have heard from someone else what waits for them there. Fact 88. In the year 2014, in a limestone cave on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, researchers found something tucked into an alcove of the cave wall that rearranged what had been an established understanding of when human beings began to make art. A hand stencil in red ochre, accompanied by a painting of an animal researchers identified as a pig, dated by uranium series analysis to at least 45,500 years ago, making it, at the time of its discovery, among the oldest known examples of figurative art and hand-related art anywhere in the world. The discovery had a particular significance not just because of its age, but because of its location. Cave art in the deep Paleolithic had long been understood primarily as a European phenomenon, centered on the painted caves of France and Spain, an expression of something that seemed to arise in Europe at a specific cultural moment. The Sulawesi cave upended that comfortable geography entirely. Art this old, this sophisticated, this clearly deliberate, on an island in the Indonesian archipelago, suggests strongly that the impulse to make images, to press a hand against a wall and record the outline, to paint the animals that shared the world with the painter, was not a European invention at all, but something the shared ancestors of all modern human beings carried with them when they spread out of Africa, a capacity for representation and record that may be far older than any surviving example we have yet found. Every cave we have not yet looked inside may contain the oldest art in the world. Fact 89. In the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, archaeologists excavating a Bronze Age site in the 2010s uncovered a detail in the stratigraphy that confused them initially. A layer of ash and burned material that appeared too recent to be from the Bronze Age occupation and too ancient to be modern contamination. Eventually, careful analysis traced this anomaly to a catastrophic fire event that could be dated to around the 12th century, coinciding with the Mongol Empire's expansion across Central Asia. The fire had burned through the Bronze Age site, damaging and destroying some of its upper layers, but in doing so had also accidentally created what archaeologists call a sealed context, a layer locked beneath the fire horizon that preserved materials, including organics, that would not normally survive in the Gobi's harsh climate, in unusually good condition. The burned layer, in other words, was both a destruction and a preservation. The same event that took something away also protected what lay beneath it, the way a forest fire kills the canopy and exposes the seedbed, allowing something to grow from exactly what appeared to be only damage. This happens in archaeology constantly. A disaster seals a moment. A flood covers a village and preserves it. A volcanic eruption buries a city and saves it. The catastrophes that end things also, sometimes, save the very evidence of the things they ended. History is full of this paradox. Nothing is simply lost. Some things are only hidden, waiting for the event that hid them to be understood clearly enough to reveal them. Fact 90. Let us close this part of our journey on a quiet hillside in Peru, in a city called Machu Picchu, which most of you have probably pictured before, and yet which still holds, even inside its fame, a genuine, quiet mystery. Machu Picchu was built by the Inca sometime around 1450 as a royal estate for a specific emperor named Pachacuti, used as a seasonal retreat and ceremonial center for perhaps 80 years, and then, quite quickly after Spanish contact, simply vacated and not mentioned to the Spanish at all, preserved by its own remoteness in the cloud forest above the Urubamba River, until its rediscovery by a Yale historian named Hiram Bingham in 1911. But what Machu Picchu was actually for, beyond its function as a royal retreat, remains an open scholarly question. Within its stonework are specific features aligned with astronomical events, a stone called the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun, positioned to mark both solstices and equinoxes. Windows in the principal temple align precisely with the June solstice sunrise. The site appears oriented deliberately to the mountain peaks surrounding it, each peak sacred in Inca cosmology. And yet, as an estate, it was also a farm, a residence, a place where women called the Chosen Women lived and wove fine cloth for the emperor's court, a place where corn was grown at altitudes corn does not usually thrive, coaxed into growth by the Incas' extraordinary understanding of their own mountain microclimate. It was, at once, a sacred astronomical instrument and someone's home. It was a place where cosmic alignment was built into the walls of the room, where a person got up in the morning and made their breakfast. And in that combination, it is one of the most direct possible records of how the ancient world understood itself, not divided between the sacred and the ordinary, but as a single landscape in which astronomy and agriculture and daily life were all one continuous, related act of attention to the world. We have moved tonight through lines in the desert and faces in the mountain, and hands pressed to cave walls and maps of skies that were already ancient. Let us slow down now, sink a little deeper, and let the final section of tonight's journey carry you all the way to the very oldest and most open questions of all. Fact 91. In a valley in the French Pyrenees, reached by a difficult climb and then a crawl through a low passage into an underground space, the size of a cathedral, there are paintings on the cave walls that have been dated to roughly 20,000 years ago. The Cave of Niort, discovered in a proper scientific sense only in 1906, holds nearly 200 animal paintings across its walls, bison and horses and deer and ibex drawn in black manganese pigment with a sureness of line and a knowledge of animal anatomy that is, quite simply, not what we expect when we think about art this old. These are not tentative marks. They are confident paintings made by hands that had clearly done this before, in the tradition of people who had been practicing this art for generations. What archaeologists found at Niort that is not found in all the other painted caves is something rarer and more intimate. On the floor of one chamber, preserved in the soft clay that has hardened over the centuries into something close to concrete, are the footprints of the people who once stood in this cave making the art. Children's feet, adult feet, someone who stood in one place long enough to leave a deep impression, someone who shuffled sideways to look more closely at something on the wall. You can follow them, still, these 20,000-year-old footprints, along the path they walked. The floor tells you exactly where they stood. You are standing in the same cave. The paintings are on the same walls. The space between then and now is enormous, and, in the same moment, not there at all. Fact 92. In the highlands of central Turkey, at the site we visited earlier, Göbekli Tepe, a new and extraordinary discovery made in 2018, has changed the way researchers read everything else at the site. Deep within one of the oldest pillars researchers found a carved scene that appears, on careful analysis, to be depicting a specific, datable astronomical event. A series of carved symbols, including a vulture holding a sphere and a headless human figure, aligned with the position of stars as they would have appeared at the horizon at a specific time of year, around 950 years before our era. If that reading is correct, what the pillar is recording is a specific date, the date of a comet impact or airburst event, powerful enough to have been visible to people across a wide area, possibly connected to a cooling event recorded in climate data around the same period, roughly 900 years before our era, sometimes called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. The people of Göbekli Tepe, in other words, may have carved a memorial to a catastrophic event in their sky, marking the day the world suddenly, briefly, got darker and colder, in stone that they then deliberately buried under rubble and built over, sealing their record of one specific day under 11,000 years of Earth. Whether this reading holds up under the broader scrutiny of the scholarly community remains actively debated, but the possibility that an ancient carved pillar contains a date, a specific remembered date, carved by people who had no writing but knew how to record time in the language of stars and animals and position and angle, is one of the most remarkable ideas in recent archaeology. Fact 93. In the mountains of Tibet, in a monastery complex that has accumulated objects from the surrounding Himalayan cultural sphere across many centuries, researchers examining a collection of ancient manuscripts in 2020 found something they had not expected. Among the documents, written in a Tibetan script that confirmed they were no older than the 8th or 9th century of our era, were texts that appeared to describe astronomical observations and mathematical calculations of a sophistication that scholars of this period did not expect in this region at this date. Calculations relating to lunar cycles, planetary positions, and eclipse prediction that reflected both Indian astronomical tradition and elements not found in any known Indian source of the same period. The discovery opened a quietly fascinating possibility that there existed in the medieval Tibetan highlands an astronomical intellectual tradition that drew from Indian sources but developed independently from them in ways that have simply not been previously studied, because the manuscripts had never been translated, never been assessed by specialists, never been properly integrated into what Western scholarship understands about the global history of astronomy. It is a reminder that our map of ancient knowledge is still full of blank spaces, not because the knowledge was never there, but because it was there in languages we have not finished reading, in monasteries and libraries we have not finished opening, in collections that have been waiting for the right specialist to walk through the door and ask the right question. Fact 94. In the year 1912, a book dealer in Rome acquired a small collection of manuscripts from a Jesuit college and sold them on. Among the manuscripts was one that immediately attracted attention, a small, handwritten book of about 240 pages, its vellum leaves covered edge to edge in an unknown script, accompanied by hundreds of illustrations of plants that did not match any known species, astronomical diagrams, and bathing figures in elaborate pipe systems. The Voynich manuscript, named after the dealer who acquired it, has been studied now for over a century by professional cryptographers, linguists, historians of science, and amateur enthusiasts, and nobody has convincingly decoded a single word of its text. Statistical analysis of the letter frequencies and word lengths confirms it is not a random string of symbols, that it has the internal structure of a real language or code, that it is not simply nonsense dressed up as writing. Carbon dating places the vellum itself in the early 15th century. Its illustrations suggest influences from multiple European and possibly Middle Eastern artistic traditions, but what it says, and who wrote it, and why, and whether the language underneath the script exists in any other surviving text, anywhere in the world, remains entirely, stubbornly, mysteriously unknown. The most unsatisfying possibility that it is an elaborate hoax, a meaningless book constructed to look meaningful in order to sell it to a gullible buyer, is disproved by the sheer consistency of its internal statistics across the whole manuscript. Someone spent considerable effort on this, whoever they were. The Voynich manuscript sits today in a temperature-controlled vault at Yale University's Beinecke Library, still speaking, still waiting, still holding its long conversation with no one in a language that no one has yet found the key to enter. Fact 95. About 50,000 years ago, in southern Africa, a group of people living near a place that is now called Blombo's Cave on the South African coast were doing something that no human being, as far as anyone had previously believed, was doing at that point in history. They were making art. They were drawing lines. They were decorating small pieces of reddish rock with abstract crosshatch patterns scratched into the ochre surface, and they were storing ochre mixed with fat in small abalone shell containers, preparing pigment in organized, deliberate quantities for purposes that went clearly beyond any immediate practical use. Blombo's Cave pushed the earliest confirmed date of abstract symbolic art back from roughly 40,000 years ago, which had been the established figure based on European cave paintings, to well over 70,000 years, suggesting that the capacity for abstract thinking, for symbolic representation, for making marks that mean something beyond themselves, is not a recent cognitive achievement, not something that appeared suddenly in Europe around 40,000 years ago, but something our ancestors carried with them from Africa on the long, slow journey outward that eventually populated the entire world. That means every cave painting, in every cave on every continent, every carved stone, every carved hand, every geometric mark on every shell, is the continuation of something that began in a small cave by the Indian Ocean in southern Africa, more than 70,000 years ago, when a person made a mark that meant something and taught someone else what it meant, and that person did the same, all the way down to tonight. Fact 96. In the 1980s, a young South African researcher named Lynn Wadley began excavating a site in the Sibudu rock shelter in KwaZulu-Natal and found something in the soil layers dating to approximately 77,000 years ago that took her years to fully understand. It was bedding. Not just dry grass gathered roughly into a sleeping space, but a deliberately constructed sleeping layer built from specific plant materials, selected for a combination of properties, with the aromatic leaves of Cryptocarya woodii laid as a base, a plant we now know has natural insect-repelling properties, overlaid with softer grass materials for comfort, the whole arrangement reaching up to 30 centimeters thick at its deepest point. Ancient people, 77,000 years ago, were making comfortable, insect-resistant beds. They were selecting plants not just for softness, but for a secondary property, the ability to repel the insects that would otherwise disrupt their sleep. They were thinking about sleep quality. They were thinking several steps ahead about their own comfort. When the bedding wore out, they did not simply discard it. They burned it, apparently a deliberate hygiene practice, removing old nest material that would have harbored the insects and parasites that a fresh bed was designed to keep away, and then built a fresh layer on the ashes, which acted as a further insect deterrent. This is not survival. This is domesticity. This is someone 77,000 years ago coming back to their familiar place at the end of a long day and arranging their bed with the particular attention you give to something you have learned, from experience, to get right. They cared about sleep. They went to some trouble to sleep well. The oldest mystery is sometimes the most recognizable one. Fact 97. In the mountains of Siberia, in Denisova Cave, researchers in 2008 extracted a small fragment of finger bone from a sediment layer roughly 40,000 years old, extracted DNA from it, and found something that completely rearranged the known family tree of ancient human beings. The bone belonged to a girl. Her DNA was not Neanderthal. It was not modern human. It was a third lineage, a previously entirely unknown archaic human population that has now been given the name Denisovans, after the cave where the only physical remains ever found of them were discovered. In the years since that initial finding, only a handful of additional Denisovan specimens have been identified, a few more bones, a jaw found in a Tibetan cave at high altitude, enough to confirm they were widespread across Asia, but not enough to paint a detailed picture of what they looked like, how they lived, or why they disappeared. What the DNA tells us is that Denisovans interbred with modern humans at least twice on the journey out of Africa, and that a significant proportion of living humans carry traces of Denisovan DNA today, particularly people of Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander ancestry, including a gift that appears to be the EPAS1 gene variant carried by Tibetan people today that allows them to live at high altitude without the physiological complications that high altitude causes in most people. The Denisovans, an entire population of our closest cousins, who lived across a huge swathe of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, are known from the remnants of a single child's finger bone and a handful of other fragments. Everything else about their civilization, their art, their language, their beliefs, their social structures, has dissolved entirely, leaving only these few grams of ancient bone and the faintest traces of their blood still flowing quietly in some of the people alive on Earth today. Fact 98. In a library in Vienna, there exists a medieval encyclopedia called the Codex Vindobonensis that includes, among many other texts, a section on magic written in Latin that draws on sources reaching back to late antiquity. And within that section, there is a recipe for an ointment described as capable of inducing vivid visions of flight. The recipe includes herbs we recognize today as containing tropane alkaloids, belladonna, henbane, mandrake, chemicals that in controlled modern laboratory conditions when absorbed through the skin, produce documented effects including vivid hallucinatory experiences of flying or falling through air. The recipe specifies application by rubbing the ointment into the skin. Medieval and early modern accounts of witches anointing themselves with mysterious preparations before their supposed flights to Sabbath meetings have been read, for most of Western history, as confessions extracted under torture, as folklore, as misogynist persecution dressed up as theology. The pharmacological evidence quietly asks whether there is something else embedded inside those accounts, a genuine folk knowledge of specific plant preparations and their specific neurological effects, misinterpreted, demonized, legally prohibited, and eventually lost. We will never know, with certainty, what someone in a 15th century European village actually experienced when they applied that ointment. We know only that the plants in the recipe are real, that their chemistry is real, and that the experience of flight they might have produced was, for the person experiencing it, as real as any flight. The boundary between mysticism and pharmacology in the ancient world is one of the places where archaeology is only beginning to learn to ask the right questions. Fact 99. Somewhere beneath the surface of the ocean, at a depth that varies from site to site, there exist the submerged landscapes of the last ice age, the world as it appeared when sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today, when Britain was connected to France and Ireland, when Australia was connected to New Guinea, when the Indonesian islands formed a single great landmass, when a shallow shelf connected Siberia to Alaska. Between roughly 15,000 and 7,000 years ago, as the great ice sheets of the last glacial maximum melted, sea levels rose, slowly but relentlessly, flooding all of those connections, all of those low-lying plains and river valleys and coastlines, at an average rate of roughly 1 centimeter per year, but with periods of much faster flooding, carrying the bones of any settlements, any middens, any fire pits, any buried objects from the people who lived there, down into the dark of the ocean, beyond the reach of any current dive technology. Every culture of the world carries flood stories. The Sumerian flood of Utnapishtim, the Hebrew story of Noah, the Yuchi people's flooding of the lower world, the Greek story of Deucalion and Pyrrha, an Australian Aboriginal oral tradition describing the flooding of land connections to now offshore islands, stories that geological evidence confirms were indeed once dry land, maintained in oral tradition across 10,000 years. We do not know how many sites, how many cities, how many cultures lie beneath the ocean that we have simply not yet had the ability to look for. The ocean floor is the largest unexcavated archaeological territory on Earth. What is down there, from the years when people called it home, is one of the largest remaining mysteries of human prehistory, waiting for the technology and the patience to go and look. Fact 100. We began tonight with a small bronze object in an English field, heavy and deliberate and 12-sided and entirely unexplained, and we have traveled a very long way since then. We have held objects too fragile to use and languages too silent to hear. We have floated above sunken cities in clear Mediterranean water and stood at the edge of bogs that kept their dead for 2,000 years. We have looked at the footprints of people moving through cave paintings they were making and read the astronomical knowledge pressed into a disk of bronze by hands that did not know what an atom was but understood, perfectly, where every star would rise. And at the very end, we have arrived here, at the fact that the human story is longer than we can hold in our minds, and mostly missing, that what we know is the thin, bright stripe at the very surface of a very deep, very old, very patient darkness below, that the people who lived before us were not simple, not primitive, not waiting for us to improve upon them. They were making careful beds and grinding medicinal pigments and rowing stone across oceans and mapping stars they named after things they loved. That every mystery we have visited tonight is not a gap in the record, or not only that, it is evidence. Evidence that people have always been here, fully alive, fully curious, fully capable of beauty and devotion and grief and engineering and sacrifice and wonder, long before anyone wrote any of it down, and in many cases, long after the writing stopped. The oldest handprint on the cave wall in Sulawesi is 45,000 years old. The newest one was probably made this week by a child at a craft table pressing a palm into paint and pressing that paint against paper. The gesture has not changed. It has never changed. It says, across every distance, across every silence, across every unreadable script and sunken city and buried mound, the same uncomplicated, enormous thing. I was here. I was real. I made this, and I left it for you. Rest now. You have traveled far enough for one night. The mysteries will still be here tomorrow, patient and waiting and real. Good night.